problem is that in the past, Hong Kong was a major international hub. It attracted huge investment from international business. It was a financial center, a legal center, and it had a cachet, not just in Asia, but right around the world. If you look at the statistics today, you are clearly losing that element of being a regional magnet, a regional hub. As Eswar Prasad, an economist and professor of trade policy at Cornell University in the US, says, Hong Kong is now facing an existential crisis as a major international financial center.
This comment is totally overstated and unfair. And if we have any problem with outflow of capital, that's partly because of the lobbying Mr. Lai and his gang has done to countries like the US to stop the inflow of capital to Hong Kong. A lot of US federal pension funds have made decisions, have ordered their fund managers not to invest in Hong Kong. And that has a lot to do with lobbying by people like Mr. Lai.
You're hemorrhaging firms, businesses with regional headquarters in Asia because they're moving out of Hong Kong, many of them to Singapore. One high-profile example, which has nothing to do with the United States, the National Australia Bank has announced that it is shutting its Hong Kong office. This is the reality you face. Your political environment is costing you big time.
Some people emigrated to Singapore. Some regional staff has gone in the past few years, partly because of our COVID-related restrictions. Hong Kong is used to people coming and going. They are free to move as part of our freedoms guaranteed by the basic law. But we have new people coming, new funds coming. Our family offices are doing well. We are attracting capital from Southeast Asia, from Saudi Arabia. Hong Kong continues to be a capital for the contemporary art auction.
If I may say so, your sunny optimism matches that of John Lee, the chief executive, who says Hong Kong still means prosperity. We are still the world's preeminent gateway. The truth, if you look at the data, is that more and more you are reliant on Chinese incomers. One international financial center, one of the biggest office blocks in Hong Kong, has seen the office space that is occupied by Chinese tenants double in the last couple of years. China's moving in, the international community is moving out, and that will change the character of Hong Kong forever.
Stephen, you are somewhat out of touch. Of the 2,600 companies listed on our stock exchange, it's been well known for a long time that 70% are Chinese enterprises, state-owned enterprises or private enterprises. China has always been a key factor driving our prosperity, whether before or after 1997.
Sadly, we're out of time. Regina Ip, I do thank you very much indeed for joining me on Hard Talk.
It's a pleasure.
That was Hard Talk. I'm Jeff Goods. You're listening to CBC Radio 1. Have a great day.
Good morning, Manitoba. I'm Marcy Marcusa, and this is Information Radio on CBC. We're live in downtown Winnipeg on 89.3 FM, 990 AM, or on the app. It is minus 12 this morning in Winnipeg. We're going to have a bit of a windy day, gusty winds. Chance of light snow and a high of minus 4. I think that snow yesterday caught us a bit off guard. A little bit more seemed to come down with those flurries in the morning than was expected. So, but that's what we're expecting today. Could see a little more. The triumphant return of the team this morning. Good morning, Corey Funk and Abby Adeyemi. Abby is our technical producer on the show and covers weather. Corey is the show director and will be on the air covering the commute. Nice to see you guys. Good morning also to Brad Lillies, who's on the other side of the glass also with our team today. We are on air till 8:37 a.m. If you need us in traffic, any issues out there, if you're listening, you're on the highway and you want to pass it along to other commuters, or if you're walking or biking, 788-3093 is the number to call. Right now, let's go to Heather Wells, speaking of updates, and find out what's making headlines in Manitoba.
Good morning. Well, more First Nations groups are cutting ties with a downtown Winnipeg hotel following the alleged treatment of a woman there. We told you about that video on social media showing a woman restrained with zip ties in the lobby of the Marlborough Hotel. Well, the Northern Chiefs, Manitoba, Kuwait, Naui, Okamakanak, has informed its members they have the right to leave if they are currently staying at the Marlborough. And the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs says most of the people it had staying there have been moved to other hotels. A Point Douglas woman says it's the neighbors who are suffering from a bureaucratic nightmare preventing the demolition of the burned-out Vulcan Ironworks site. Catherine Flynn says the entire community is in danger from asbestos and repeated fires. We'll hear more in our next local news at 6:30.
All right, thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Well, in the first hour of the show, you know the Hubble telescope and what kind of history it made. Well, it's soon to be retired. We're going to learn more about one proposed replacement that's being developed right here in Manitoba. So we'll hear all about that in the first hour of the show. In addition, still staying with the first hour, as freezing weather raises demands on power grids across Canada this winter, we are going to look at whether a more national system could help alleviate provincial energy pressures. And in this province, that means talk of the east-west power grid is back. So let's revisit that. What could Manitoba's role be moving forward? So stay tuned. All of that in the first hour. More later we'll tell you about. But first, World Report.
On Cue with Tom Power.
The director Ava DuVernay has made a career out of telling these profound stories with a strong social conscience. Maybe you've seen her films like Selma or 13th. Ava will tell you about her latest film, Origin, and what drew her to a book that was called Unadaptable.
I write answers.
That's coming up on Cue, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. This is World Report. Good morning from CBC News. I'm Marcia Young. Good morning from CBC Voters in New Hampshire are heading to the polls. Today marks the first of the presidential primaries leading up to the November election. The small town of Dixville Notch began voting at midnight. All 6 votes cast there went to Nikki Haley. The former South Carolina governor is now Donald Trump's only competition in the race for the Republican nomination. The CBC's Richard Madden joins me now from Washington. And Richard, there is an early but small lead for Nikki Haley going into today's primaries. What are we expecting as the rest of the state heads to the polls?
Yeah, I think we can expect a strong push by both the Haley and Trump campaigns to basically get out the vote. Turnout's the ballgame, and Nikki Haley is hoping for a surprise upset against the former president, who, according to polls, maintains a solid lead in New Hampshire. So she's banking on a coalition of anti-Trumpers, moderates, and independents, or undeclared voters as they're called there, to show up in big numbers. Last night, she made her closing pitch to voters, sharpening her attacks against Trump's age, his political baggage, and the mood for change.
This really is an option. Do you want more of the same? Or do you want to go forward? Are we really going to say that we're okay with having our options be 2 80-year-olds that run for president?
So the battle line's drawn. On the other hand, Trump is hoping for a blowout, which would basically signal to the party he's pretty much wrapped up the nomination. At a rally last night, he was joined on stage by some of his former competitors turned supporters, images he hopes will send a message for Republicans to coalesce behind him.
If Trump wins tonight, is that the end of the GOP race?
Yeah, I think so, because a win by Trump in New Hampshire would make it almost inevitable. He will win the party's presidential nomination, setting up a 2020 rematch against President Joe Biden. So really, this is a make or break moment for Haley and the anti-Trump resistance within the Republican Party. Now, Trump wants to steamroll over his detractors, and a win tonight would send a strong signal to them. Now, there's an old saying in America's election season that Iowa picks corn, New Hampshire picks presidents, and Trump could essentially bring the race to a finish with a strong showing tonight.
All right. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
The CBC's Richard Madden in Washington. And proceedings in Trump's defamation trial are again postponed today. He's expected to testify in the civil case involving E. Jean Carroll. Because of illness, the trial will resume tomorrow. The jury in this case will determine what Trump owes Carroll in damages related to defamatory statements he made about her sex assault allegations. Israel's military says its troops have encircled Khan Yunis. It says the city is a Hamas stronghold. But Palestinian Red Crescent says Israeli drones are shooting at anyone who moves near the Al hospital. The IDF says its troops are engaged in targeted combat, and it has been a fierce 24 hours of fighting.
במהלך הלחימה במרכז רצועת עזה
IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari says 21 soldiers have been killed in the past 24 hours. That is the largest single loss of life for the Israeli military since the war began. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says at least 195 Palestinians have been killed in that same time frame. It says most of the casualties have been women and children. A heli-skiing company in British Columbia says 3 people have died in a crash. It happened around 4 p.m. local time yesterday north of Terrace. That is in the west central part of the province. 4 other people are in hospital with critical injuries. The company Northern Escape Heli-Skiing said in a statement to CBC News it's focused on the safety of guests, staff, and guides. In Montreal, a judge will hear arguments on an injunction request to stop work on the Northvolt electric vehicle battery plant. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called the multi-billion-dollar plant a transformative project for Quebec. But an environmental group is arguing its construction could harm wetlands. The CBC's Sarah Levitt has more.
The battery maker Northvolt had already started clearing trees to make way for a mega factory spanning 170 hectares east of Montreal. The company was granted the right to move forward without having to undergo an environmental review. Now, though, the potential impact on the area's wetlands has prompted a group and 3 citizens to take it to court. Mark Bichai is a lawyer with the Quebec Environmental Law Centre.
Considering that this has been announced as such a big project, the Quebec Environmental Law Centre has been asking for an independent environmental assessment to make sure that there's meaningful public participation.
The Quebec government continues to defend its decision to skip the review. Pierre Fitzgibbon is Quebec's Minister of Economy and Innovation. He worries the court action will discourage future foreign investments in Quebec. His federal counterpart, François-Philippe Champagne, hopes the project goes ahead.
This is a generational opportunity for Quebec, for Canada. We need to do the thing in the right way, and I know that I trust the company is going to do that.
The injunction hearing will be heard by a judge this morning. A ruling in favor would halt any work for at least 10 days, leaving open the question about whether an environmental assessment should be required. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
The sentencing hearing for the man who murdered 4 members of the Afzal family resumes today. The London, Ontario judge will hear arguments about whether the truck attack amounted to terrorism. Nathaniel Veltman has been convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Now the court will look more closely at his motivation. The Liberal cabinet continues its retreat in Montreal, and the federal NDP is in Edmonton this week. They are getting ready for the next parliamentary sitting that begins next week. David Thurton reports.
I was able to take down a conservative stronghold here in Edmonton-Griesbach.
The NDP's Blake Desjardins saying the meeting in Alberta this week is a chance for the party to connect with its prairie roots and to remind itself and Canadians it's up to the task to take on the Tories.
It's no secret that Edmonton, I think, has been underrepresented. The last election had 34 Conservatives, and what we've seen was very little engagement federally, whether it was our MPs or whether it was policies, but I wanted to turn that around, and I think part of inviting our caucus here will help do that.
Aside from election strategy, they're also focused on the supply and confidence agreement between the NDP and the Liberals. Anne McGrath is the NDP's former national director. She's now taking on a new role overseeing progress on the party's deal with the Liberals.
There's a lot in that agreement that needs some attention.
Things Democrats hope to deliver on are ironing out the details of the pharmacare program and moving other key pieces of Labour legislation through Parliament. David Thurton, CBC News, Ottawa.
British MPs are holding an inquiry into how to improve the well-being of children, and one UK charity has a suggestion: send them outside to play. The group says compared to previous generations, children today spend too much time indoors, isolated and inactive. It wants the British government to make neighborhoods more child-friendly. A 2-month-old immigration program for relatives of some Canadians has already reached its limit. The goal was to reunite 11,000 Colombians, Venezuelans, and Haitians with their families here. But the process is pricey. And as Nicole Williams reports, one man says he's out thousands of dollars. The applications to bring his family from Port-au-Prince were rejected.
They're eventually going to be killed.
Nixon Valeur is desperate to save his family. His 6 brothers and their children all live in Haiti. Since the assassination of the country's president in 2021, Haiti has fallen into chaos.
The whole neighborhood is kind of invaded by gangs and then ask people to give money. If they don't give money, they will kill them. They don't care.
Immigration Minister Mark Miller launched a new program in November to welcome 11,000 foreign nationals from Colombia, Venezuela, and Haiti.
But it does recognize the importance of family reunification and indeed our important humanitarian ongoing commitments.
Valeur submitted applications immediately, each person needing paperwork including police certificates, travel documents, even biometric exams. None necessarily easy to get in a country like Haiti, and expensive too. But despite paying thousands of dollars and uploading dozens of documents, each application was returned incomplete, and it's now too late for Valeur to resubmit because the program has hit capacity.
I feel speechless.
Immigration lawyer Argavan Jarami says there are too many barriers for such programs.
It ought to be designed in a way that the individuals do have a fair chance.
A spokesperson with Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada says it allows for flexibility with applications, but only before programs reach their cap. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Ottawa.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Good morning, Manitoba, and hello, Winnipeg. Thanks for joining us. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio on CBC, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, or the app on YouTube. Should say on the app or on YouTube. Light snow falling in the city this morning. It's minus 11, the forecast in a moment. This hour on the show, let's talk about how to warm up with an east-west power grid, which is back on the menu in terms of discussions across this country. We're going to look at whether a national system could help alleviate provincial energy pressures and what our role might be in that in Manitoba. That is how we are a have province. That's what we have. But what part of the picture could we play moving forward if this is developed? So stay tuned. We'll talk about it. We'll get some analysis around it. Also, the Hubble telescope will soon retire. We'll learn about one proposed replacement that's being developed here in Manitoba. Stay tuned. It is called the Castor telescope, by the way, and we'll hear more rather from an assistant professor in physics and astronomy right here at the University of Manitoba. So they're going to be in studio with us. I'm looking forward to that. Right now, let's talk to Heather Wells about headlines and updates there. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, the head of Assiniboine Community College in Brandon believes this country is caught up in a scrap between Ottawa and Ontario over international students. Mark Frieson says the number of international students at ACC has exploded in the last decade to more than 20% of ACC's total population. He says the federal cap on international student permits is a concern. The Winnipeg School Division says it's taking action to change the overrepresentation of Indigenous students in its suspension numbers. Data from the city's largest school division shows the majority of students suspended over the last 6 years self-identified as Indigenous, and Indigenous students represent only 30% of the student population. We'll hear more coming up in our next local news at 6:30.
Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
Let's get to the forecast now with Abby Adiyemi. Welcome back.
Good morning, Mercy. Guess what?
What?
We will be warming up today.
Woohoo!
We are going to be warming
for
up.
real.
For real, for real. But right now in Winnipeg, it's currently minus 11 in the downtown. And like I mentioned, we're going to be warming up on the mostly cloudy skies today. We'll be warming up all the way to minus 4. And you can feel the difference out there for those that will be commuting this morning. It's going to be mainly cloudy with a chance of light snow later in the day. And with the wind, it's going to be picking up, blowing south later this morning. But Winnipeg currently is at minus 11. And for commuters, take it easy on the road, especially if you will be driving. But Winnipeg is currently at minus 11.
All right. Thank you, Abby.
You're welcome.
And Corey Funk, also welcome back to you.
Are we going to take bets on how many people are wearing shorts around the city today?
Oh, there's always some.
There's always a couple people in T-shirts too.
Yeah, for sure. The bomber dude who did it for like years till they won a Grey Cup.
Around the high schools, all the guys always like to wear their 100%. T-shirts as soon as it gets warm.
I never played volleyball or practiced volleyball when I was in high school without leaving and just keeping my shorts.
Yeah.
Always my mom yelling, "Close your coat, put on some pants."
Yeah, classic.
All right, let's get to the commute.
Yeah, pretty quiet out there, as you can imagine. Right now, highways looking okay too. The sidewalks also were pretty clear on my way in this morning. But if you're seeing anything out there that you want to let me know about, if you're walking, biking, driving, let me know, and I'll let your fellow listeners know. That number to call, 204-788-3093.
Well, last week we had extreme cold here in Manitoba, and in other parts of the country, it triggered alarm bells. Extreme cold in Alberta's Energy Authority last week was an issue. In the face of record-breaking demand for electricity in that province, the province issued emergency alerts to residents to use less power or face potential rolling blackouts. Now, experts say incidents like these are only increasing due to climate change, extreme weather, and a push toward electrification. It is all prompting a need to consider the fragility and future of Canada's power grids. We have done some recent reporting on the capacity of our power grid here in Manitoba. And of course, if you are a longtime resident of this province, then you know we've been talking for years about the possibility of an east-west power grid and whether or not Manitoba has a place in that, which obviously we would and should moving forward. But it's just never happened. Came close years ago with possible funding from the feds, but that never came to fruition. So let's look at the challenge and the fragility of the future of Canada's power grids and whether or not an east-west grid could be back on the table. Grace Brown is with us, senior analyst with the electricity team at Pembina Institute. Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's start in Alberta and the situation I outlined there. In your view, is it an indicator, as I said, of the fragility of our grids nationwide, or do you see it as an outlier at this stage at least?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question to be asking right now. I think that although the frequency of grid alerts in Alberta has certainly increased in recent years, it's not necessarily indicative of the rest of the country. These alerts have often been triggered through some combination of those things that you mentioned, like high demand caused by extreme weather, like we just saw, planned and unplanned outages of natural gas plants, and peak demand times that coincide with times of low generation. But the thing about Alberta is that the grid is uniquely islanded, really, compared with the rest of the country. So it has pretty small interties to its neighbors, which leave it susceptible to these kinds of events. For example, Alberta can meet about 4 to 5% of its hourly demand with imports, but if you look at BC, they can meet up to 57% of their average hourly demand with imports. So what we're seeing here is that increased interties to our provincial neighbors can really help with that grid reliability and stability.
Oh, we've been waiting in Manitoba because we have it to give. Now we have to understand capacity and such. But as it stands now, just for listeners to revisit to understand this, how much electricity is transferred or shared interprovincially?
So about 10% of the electricity that's generated in Canada gets transferred between provinces. So about half of that is from Newfoundland to Quebec, and then there's also export to the U.S.
And what are the biggest challenges? Why haven't we moved further with interconnectivity across Canada so far?
That's a great question. And I think it's one that, people from the U.S. and Europe ask themselves when they come to Canada, why are there not more interconnections here? And I think that looking at the reasons, it basically comes down to the fact that it hasn't really been a priority for enough people. So electricity supply is under provincial jurisdiction. So each province is able to do its own thing, really. And that's a very different system than they have in the U.S., where the federal government has a much larger role to play in that electricity system. Consequently, our provincial systems are quite different. So some have markets, some don't. And as well, that national infrastructure, so complicating things, so interties between provinces, is under federal jurisdictions. So for a successful project, you're looking at collaboration between those two provincial governments as well as the federal government to get that done. But more electricity collaboration here at home would increase reliability on our grids and offer more options to keep those costs down. Really building more power plants isn't always the best solution. And I think it sounds like you're aware of that here in Manitoba.
What would it take politically and financially to improve the situation and see more electricity being shared between provinces? I mean, besides a whole lot of cash.
I think that politically, awareness of the benefits is the first step. I really see some momentum to reimagine the electricity system here in Canada as well as the U.S. And what the focus is on meeting the rising electricity demand that we've predicted while improving grid reliability, affordability of power, and cleaning up the grid to attract companies as well as achieve our climate goals. So in the U.S., there's a lot of effort to build a continental grid that connects much of North America. So they're looking at the coordination and the rules and markets that need to happen to make that work. And I'd really like to see more Canadian provinces involved in that kind of effort so that they don't miss out on all of these benefits. So what we need to accomplish an affordable, reliable, and clean grid is more transmission lines inside and between provinces as well as the U.S., more batteries and other forms of electricity storage, more wind and solar power, which are currently the cheapest forms of power available, more carbon capture and storage for gas-fired power plants and biomass power, and also more energy efficiency and other forms of demand-side management so that we can look at grid benefits of smoothing those demand curves out and putting less stress on the grid.
What about provinces agreeing to everything we're talking about, in terms of what their piece of the pie will be? Because I know in the past when we've talked East-West Power Grid, Manitoba, Ontario, Newfoundland, Labrador, most vocal proponents of East-West power transmission. Other provinces trying to figure out how they fit into that. I know you don't necessarily speak to all of the politics, but what's your sense of the willingness when you move forward as, provinces are now waking up to also the necessity of this, given what Alberta just went through with the blackouts?
Yeah, I think that a good way to go about this might be to start where people are interested in it. So start where there is demand for this system, and then move along from there. So I think that there could be an opportunity for all of those provinces to lead in this area.
Thank you very much for being with us this morning, Grace, and for the analysis. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's Grace Brown. She's a senior analyst with the electricity team at the Pembina Institute.
Forget your fancy indoor rinks, you Bonspiel newbies. Ironman outdoor curling is for those who hurry hard to curl on the frozen river.
Why are you talking like that?
I'm making the Ironman outdoor curling promo sound tougher.
But it's basically a fun spiel on the ice that everyone will enjoy. February 2nd to 4th. CBC is a proud sponsor.
Visit cbc.ca/Manitoba/community for more. Sorry, Janet.
6:21 a.m. is the time right now on 89.3 a.m. FM rather, 990 a.m. on the app or on YouTube. Out there this morning, light snow, really light snow. Minus 11 is the current temperature in Winnipeg. Cold spot to Dooley Lake, minus 24. So often the cold spot. Kleefeld, actually in southeastern Manitoba, is the warm spot, sitting at minus 9. Today in Winnipeg, we're going to go to minus 4. That's our daytime high. Now, don't be too fooled because we do have strong winds. Winds will be south 30, gusting to 50. But even still, we have broken the back of that extreme cold for a little bit, it looks like, here in the southern part of the province. Well, look up and get excited. The Hubble telescope is set to be retired after more than 30 years in Earth's orbit. Now, that's not what you're supposed to be excited about. The excitement is next. A proposed replacement could have roots here in Manitoba. It's called the Castor Telescope. It's the Canadian-led project that's being researched and developed in part by a team of experts from the University of Manitoba. Tyrone Woods is an assistant professor of physics and astronomy at the U of M, as well as science co-lead on the Castor Telescope. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks very much for having me.
So am I overstating this? How exciting is this?
Not at all. This is an incredible opportunity for Canada and for astronomy. Really, we're going to be building humanity's foremost eye on the UV sky. And part of it's going to be built right here over by the airport.
When you knew you were going to be part of this project or this was going to be happening, obviously you know long before we end up in public airwaves talking about it. What did you feel like as a scientist to be part of something like this?
Just incredibly lucky. It's an amazing time to be working in astronomy and science in general. And this is something that's been coming on for 12 years now. It's in development. It's so exciting to be able to finally talk about it. But really, it's going to be a revolutionary thing for Canada.
I'm glad you're in early because this is the time, 6:22 a.m., where people look to the skies. It's still dark
right.
out. Remind people first, just because people know Hubble was a big deal. Absolutely. They may not really understand, though. What has the Hubble telescope, before we turn to what Castor could be, what has the Hubble meant to NASA and researchers?
So Hubble has been just a game-changing space telescope. So it's given us access to the ultraviolet. You can't see that from the ground. Mercifully for us, the Earth's atmosphere protects us from that. And it's done everything from, following up on supernova explosions, exploding stars, to revealing how supermassive black holes work. So one of the coolest things I think Hubble did is it just picked an empty patch of sky. It looked empty and just stared for hours. And when you stare long enough, you see all those really faint things. It turns out no matter where you look, there's galaxies and galaxies.
It just opened our minds,
Absolutely.
right? And our understanding. So Castor could take its place. Tell me a little bit more about it and what you're working on at U of M.
That's right. So Castor is going to be a 1-meter aperture telescope, but it's going to have a larger bus around it, about the size of a mid-sized sedan in the end. And basically, it's going to be providing our key instrument for looking into the ultraviolet in the 2030s. It's going to be able to rapidly turn around when something goes boom in the night, when a supernova explodes or things like that. We're going to be on the scene investigating within 2 hours. It's going to be able to map the outer solar system, tracing the origins of our system of planets. It's going to be able to map the evolution of the cosmos itself and everything in between. It's going to be a real game changer.
It sounds like you mentioned 2 hours. It could respond to something. It could move and look. Is it more being designed right now to be more nimble or reactive than Hubble was? Like, where are the advances in technology that you're hoping for?
It's going to be more nimble, but one of the biggest things that it's going to be able to do, whenever you're building a telescope, you have to make certain trade-offs. Hubble, it's an amazing instrument, but it can only look at a really tiny pinpoint in the night sky at a time. Castor is going to have 100 times the field of view, so it can see roughly the size of the full moon in the night sky. So that means things that took hours upon hours upon hours to do with Castor, mapping out nearby galaxies and things like that, Castor can do in a few hours in a night and in a few pointings.
How involved are we? Like, we're talking about the Manitoba connection
That's
here.
right.
Are all provinces having a piece of this pie? How special is this that we have a Manitoba connection?
That's right. So people are working on this from coast to coast and in fact around the world, but this is a Canadian-led mission. So it's been, the idea has been incubated by the National Research Council, particularly our astronomy lab out in Victoria, and people are working on it in Toronto and Montreal, in Calgary, right across the country. But here in Manitoba, first of all, some of the leadership is here, yours truly included, but also we're going to be building the actual satellite bus. You can think of this as the spacecraft that houses the telescope.
Okay.
It's going to be built right here in Manitoba by Magellan Aerospace over by the airport.
How long does it take to build something that's going to last in space?
Quite a while. So we've been thinking about this.
This is where the sedan comparison ends, right?
That's right. Yeah, a little, not quite such a production line. That's right. We've been working on the design for about 12 years now. It's gotten to the point where, if we get government approval, get the go-ahead to go this year, we can build it in 5-6 years tops. We'll be ready for launch in 2030.
Wow. So is that the goal, to be ready for launch in 2030, or what's the goal for the timeline?
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal is to launch in 2030 because Hubble's done an amazing job, as you said at the beginning, for 30-odd years now. But it's, to come back to that car comparison, anything with moving parts, after a while, and especially in a harsh environment like space, it wears down. We need a replacement soon.
Do we know what happens to Hubble? Like, when they say they retire this iconic telescope.
That's right.
Where does it go? I'm guessing it goes to a museum.
So NASA hasn't quite decided yet, right? It's not so easy to recover anymore because one thing they also retired is the shuttle, right? So we don't exactly have something that can go and work on it at the moment. So one possibility, if we do absolutely nothing, is that it burns up in the next few years. So it's already in a relatively low orbit. There are talks of, maybe we could prepare a special mission to boost it up into a higher orbit, give it a few more years of life.
Yeah.
But the gyroscopes are starting to fail. The electronics are getting old. It's time to build a new telescope one way or another.
It seems sad to me that it would burn up, but maybe it's appropriate given.
The alternative is that it's space junk up there. We don't want that either. We don't want to be throwing junk around.
Yeah. When you think about what this project that we're talking about, Castor, can mean for Manitoba's involvement moving forward in, as you said, a very exciting age of space exploration, what are your hopes there?
So I hope that, first of all, this is an inspiration for all of the young people who are looking into, not just astronomy, but the sciences and STEM fields in general. This is also going to be a huge motivator and a huge accelerator for Canada's aerospace industry generally. As you said, there's a new space age, a new space race coming. And the telescopes that we build to look out are just as good for looking down. And Canada is already starting to become a leader, but we need this government investment to keep it up in Earth observation, which is revolutionizing everything from climate science to agriculture.
How many people are involved in the project at this stage when you think of it from an industry point of view,
Absolutely.
so to speak? Yeah.
So there's already 100 scientists and engineers working across Canada, and that's before it's been fully funded yet.
And in Manitoba, how many
and
people
in
are
Manitoba, I would say of order a dozen.
Yeah. And have they all been involved for the 12 years you mentioned in talking and developing? And
so it's been a slowly growing process. I'm, a relative newbie at about 4 years on it now. So
wow. Why was Manitoba chosen to be integral in this part of it? Like the expertise you talked about building what you've been working on.
Yeah.
Is that why we were highlighted for that?
Yeah, exactly. So Manitoba has a great heritage in aerospace. We build things here, and that was a big draw for me to come here. It was a big draw for Castor to really plant a flag here. It's a great place to live and to work.
How's it different from NASA's James Webb Telescope?
That's a great question. So James Webb is an amazing instrument, and Canada had a key part in that as well. The fact that James Webb can point so accurately and so carefully, and also the fact that the way that it can look for evidence of oxygen and other things in distant worlds, that's all Canadian-made instrumentation. But you always have to make trade-offs, like I said. James Webb can only look in the infrared, redder than red light. Hubble is an all-purpose telescope. It can look infrared, it can look at the light we see, and it can look in the UV. But James Webb can't. We need something that can look in the UV and optical
and that's
for
Castor.
the 2030s, and that's Castor.
Good luck. We'll obviously check in with you as there are updates. Thank you for sharing this with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Anytime.
That's Tyrone Woods in studio with us early this morning. Science co-lead on the Castor Telescope project, as well as an assistant professor of physics and astronomy at the University of Manitoba. It is right now in Winnipeg, minus 11, and your CBC Winnipeg News is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 6:30, minus 11, as Marcy mentioned, and our normals are even warming up. The normal high this time of year for the past month has been minus 13. Starting today, the normal is minus 12, so we are warming up. Today's high in Winnipeg, minus 4. First Nations groups in Manitoba are cutting ties with the downtown Winnipeg hotel over the alleged treatment of a young woman there. Video on social media shows the woman restrained with zip ties in the lobby of the Marlborough Hotel. That's angered Indigenous leaders and advocates. The Marlborough and other hotels often accommodate First Nations members who must travel to Winnipeg for health care or other appointments. The Assembly of Manitoba chief says most of the people who it had staying at the hotel have been relocated to other hotels. Grand Chief Kathy Merrick says incidents like this have an impact on the relationship between hotels and First Nations.
They need to know that they have to be culturally sensitive to our people, and that they be able to ensure that we get the same service as everybody else.
Manitoba Kuwait Nawi Okamakinak has posted a message to its members on Facebook saying they have the right to move out of the Marlborough if they want. The head of Assiniboine Community College in Brandon says the federal cap on foreign student permits could be a problem for Manitoba. Mark Friesen says the number of international students at ACC has exploded in the last decade to more than 20% of the college's total population.
If the result of the cap or the rules result in fewer students or more delays, that won't be positive in terms of both the population goals that we might have here, as well as any resulting financial implications of there being fewer students.
Friesen says Ottawa should open up visas and permits for apprenticeship programs. He says those international students could help fill workforce gaps in Canada for things like building housing. The Winnipeg School Division says it is taking action to change the overrepresentation of Indigenous students in its suspension numbers. Data from the city's largest school division show the majority of students suspended in the last 6 years self-identified as Indigenous. Indigenous students represent only 30% of the student population. Superintendent Matt Henderson says more needs to be done to support Indigenous students.
They're overwhelmingly overrepresented, and so what we have to sort of say is, let's take a step back at that and look at, how we decolonize our schools.
Henderson says Winnipeg School Division has hired a divisional kukum and is hiring more Indigenous principals, teachers, and staff. As well, he says they are revamping R.B. Russell High School to provide training to people in the community to work within the school system. A Point Douglas woman is fed up with the bureaucracy delaying demolition of what's left of the old Vulcan Ironworks site. The owner says he can't go ahead because the city and province are giving him conflicting orders. The city told him to demolish the buildings. The province says the demolition must be done with water because there's asbestos in those old pipes, but it's too cold. Catherine Flynn says the neighbors are the ones suffering.
They've got to find some way to get, right and left hands talking and cooperating, because while they're diddling around, you're putting an entire community in danger. So asbestos particles are blowing around a residential neighborhood, and that's okay, but we can't put construction people in danger to do the cleanup where they might possibly have the right safety equipment.
Flynn says governments must streamline the process. An appeal by Vulcan's owner will be heard by the city next month. Now to New Hampshire, where the Republican presidential primary is being held today.
Each and every one of you is going to cast the most important vote of your entire life.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump making a last-minute pitch to voters, insisting he will win the state primary and beat Joe Biden in the general election. Meanwhile, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is trying to convince voters in New Hampshire only she can beat Biden.
Trump and Biden? It's a dead heat. It's going to be a nail-biter of an election. We don't know what's going to happen. I'm in every one of those same general election polls, and I defeat Biden by up to 17 points.
Haley has already won the first polling station that opened in New Hampshire at midnight. All 6 voters in Dixville Notch cast their ballots for Haley. A battle of division leaders. Scores! Vlad Nemesnikov in the first period on Sportsnet tying the Jets with the Bruins. But that was the end of Winnipeg scoring, and it was the end of Winnipeg's streak of allowing 3 or fewer goals in 34 games. The Jets fall in Boston 4-1 the final. Jets head coach Rick Bowness.
That's probably the worst game we've had in a long time, and with our breakouts. We were slow moving it when the passes were soft, so that allows Boston to play their game.
Jets goalie Connor Hellebuck with 17 saves last night. Next up, the Jets head to Toronto for a matchup against the Leafs tomorrow night. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
All right, thank you, Heather Walls.
You're welcome.
Let's look at the regional forecast now with Abby Adeyemi. We're all smiling. And even though we could use a bit more snow, I think right now more of us will appreciate the break and heading into the warm weather.
Yeah, I think we need the break. The break, and then the cold is going to come back after a few days. But right now, Winnipeg is currently at -11, mainly cloudy out there with a 30% chance of light snow. Now, the south blowing wind is going to be coming brisk this morning, so you need to put that into consideration. We're heading to a high of -4. Heading to Brandon now. Good morning to folks in Brandon. You're currently at -13 with light snow around you. You'll also be getting a 30% chance of light snow with south blowing winds. You're heading to a high of -4 also today. Thompson, good morning. You are currently at -22, mostly cloudy, 60% chance of light snow, heading to a high of -14. Gimli is currently at -14 with light snow. It's going to be mostly cloudy later in the day, and then the wind is going to be blowing from the south. Also, you're heading to a high of -4. Steinbach is currently at -9, heading to a high of -4. Morris is at -9 with light snow and heading to a high of -4 also, and it's going to be mainly cloudy out there. But Winnipeg is currently at -4.
All right, thanks, Abby.
You're welcome. I said -4, -11, sorry.
That's all right. We're hopeful for -4. That's the daytime high, so we get it. We got it. As long as you don't say -30, we're still smiling at you. All right, let's get into what's happening on the commute. Corey?
It's always -4 in my heart.
Said every Manitoban in the middle of January.
Exactly. It's been a pretty straightforward commute so far this morning. It appears, haven't heard anything yet on the commuter line, and overall things seemed fairly clear on the way in this morning. Sidewalks were nice and grippy. Highways so far in Manitoba 501 are looking fairly clear as well. But of course, we know things can change, and things don't always go as planned. And if that's you see what's going on out there, stalled car, pothole, slippery conditions, give me a call on the CBC commuter line and I will let folks know what you're seeing out there. That number to call, 204-788-3093.
All right, thanks, Corey.
Thank you.
Crystal Ramlakan has been standing by on Zoom, and it's time to zoom into our business report. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Marcy.
So let's start with the Bank of Canada. Their next decision will affect interest rates, and it's set for tomorrow. What are we thinking this is going to look like?
Well, it is widely expected the bank is going to hold its key interest rate steady at 5%, just like it has for the last 3 announcements. But as the economy slows and forecasters anticipate a steady decline in inflation, economists are going to be looking for clues as to when the Bank of Canada plans to start cutting rates. So the bank has not ruled out the possibility of raising rates again if inflation doesn't cooperate, but forecasters don't believe another hike is actually on the table. Now, the Bank of Canada is expected to cut interest rates as early as this spring in order to avoid a sharper economic downturn than is necessary. Now, over the last year, the Canadian economy has stagnated as borrowing costs have weighed on businesses and consumers. But the bank isn't expected to start discussing rate cuts just yet, actually, particularly since inflation rose last month. Now, the bank will also publish its quarterly monetary policy report tomorrow. That's going to include new forecasts for the economy and inflation. And in its last report, it was projecting inflation would fall back down to its 2% target in 2025.
Well, as always, tomorrow we will see what they have to say, and then we'll have some analysis of that. Stocks, meantime, are up in both Canada and the States. What's behind that momentum?
Well, investors are upbeat as they look forward to upcoming earnings and signs of an artificial intelligence boom for tech. So in the U.S., the S&P 500 and the Dow had another record high close yesterday, and Canada's main stock index also edged a little bit higher. And experts say after a period of consolidation to begin the year, this is a bullish signal for markets. Now, the strength is on the back of, like I was saying, sectors like technology, real estate, and industrials. But with less exposure to certain sectors like tech here in Canada, the TSX did lag behind its U.S. peers yesterday. Now, we are going to see earnings for Netflix, Tesla, and Visa this week, and some major rail companies are going to start reporting soon too. And that's all just going to give us an understanding of where consumers and the economy is at. So for more on this, here's Colin Szynski, who is the Chief Market Strategist at SIA Wealth Management.
When companies report results, there's potential for significant volatility. Sometimes stocks take off on earnings news. Sometimes they get hit on earnings news. And the most important thing is that even when earnings are good, sometimes investors react more to guidance or other news coming out of the companies than the actual results. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things happening.
And Marcy, it's also a big week for economic data out of the U.S., including the report on the GDP.
And finally, before we look at markets, are robots already starting? Are they really taking our jobs?
Well, they are taking on a lot more responsibility at some fast food restaurants. So a Canadian robotics startup has come up with this thing called Remy, which can make up to 300 salads an hour. And the inventor says it could help with consistency, cut down on wait time, and cut labor costs by up to a third. And as companies grapple with staff shortages and seek to cut costs, more big chains are turning to automation. Now, since the pandemic, fewer people wanted those demanding jobs on the restaurant sector's front lines. So by 2021, more than 250,000 restaurant workers did quit to find new careers, according to a report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Now, Chipotle is testing a few options that could roll out in Canada later this year. The company is experimenting with a machine that can cut, core, and scoop avocados, helping serve up a batch of guacamole in half the usual time. So for more on this, here's Kurt Garner, who is Chipotle's Chief Technology Officer.
We're not developing things to replace people in our restaurants. We're still going to be cooking all of our food by hand. You'll still walk into a Chipotle, talk to a cashier, have your meal prepared in front of you. But at the same time, there are huge opportunities now, I think, in the mashup of emerging technologies to help enhance that experience.
Now, while this technology is still expensive, fast food chains are starting to weigh the benefits of it. Garner says a piece of equipment, which is actually called the avocado, will pay for itself in 1 to 2 years.
We need to start doing like the word of the show. And today, there is no doubt I am writing down the avocado.
Yeah.
Clever. How are markets looking?
So in Europe, markets are turning lower, losing positivity seen at the start of the week. Germany right now, though, is up. The UK and France are both down. In Asia, Hong Kong stocks rebounded to lead gains. And the Bank of Japan kept its monetary policy unchanged in its first meeting of the year. So Japan is down, Shanghai and Hong Kong are both up. Oil is down 67 cents to $74.09 US per barrel. Gold is up $1.93 to $2,023.45 US per ounce. And the dollar is just slightly up 0.01 of a cent to 74.2 cents US.
All right, Crystal Lee Ramlicam, we'll talk to you and see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Marcy.
That's Crystal Lee Ramlicam with our business report. Well, in a few minutes, we're going to get some analysis about what's happening in federal politics in Ottawa. The federal Liberals have been holding their cabinet retreat, and we've been hearing about that and talking about that throughout the week with some analysis. The big thing yesterday was the federal immigration minister coming out and making it official. We had heard this may be coming. He did put a temporary 2-year cap on new international students' permits. Now, on cross-country checkup, they were asking over the weekend, is Canada striking the right balance between welcoming newcomers and housing affordability? So that's how they framed the question. People were calling in about that. All these things, of course, do fit together. But one of our listeners called with his own perspective on this and had a word of caution about how people, view these stories and these developments in our country.
Good morning. My name is David Camfield, and I teach labor studies and sociology at the University of Manitoba, and I'm calling in about the question being posed, it was posed on Cross Country Checkup and discussed on Information Radio this morning about the trade-off or balance between immigration and housing. And I really am very concerned about the way this question is being discussed, because the whole discussion rests on an assumption that there is a great growth in immigration, which is causing the real problems, which are happening around the shortage of affordable housing in Canada. And this is just actually completely wrong from a social science perspective. There's no sudden increase in permanent immigration that's happening. And when it comes to temporary migrants, they're often housed by their employers. They're not competing for housing in the way that permanent residents and citizens do. So it's just simply wrong when it comes to explaining the real problems that are there in the housing situation. And it's dangerous, too, because it points the finger at immigrants as responsible for real problems where they're not the cause of the problem at all. So it's actually fanning the flames of racism. The real problem we have is a for-profit construction industry which is failing to meet people's needs for housing. So I'm quite concerned that discussion is being framed the way that it's being framed. Thank you.
Thank you for weighing in. We actually had other people writing in to our Facebook page yesterday. What we did was I took the question from Cross Country Checkup and I put it verbatim on my Facebook page. So that was how we touched that locally. But of course, the framing the question in that way, as David's saying, can cause some concern. Kev Roberts said the question is not that simple. Just as there are many classifications of options for housing, there's many classifications of immigration. Housing crisis is far too complicated to be pinned on a single factor. I'm not even sure how long ago, for example, he writes, my family members came to Canada. It was many generations ago, but who am I to question another's right to immigrate here just because I've forgotten the prejudice and hardships my ancestors endured? So he also took this as a fanning the flames question for people judging people coming to Canada. Of course, not the intention, but perhaps clumsily worded. And so I want to just put out there, obviously that was not the intention. I hear you. And thank you for calling in, for writing in with that concern about how it was framed. We are going to be talking more about what actually happened by the feds a little bit later on the program this morning. So after 8 o'clock on the show, as we mentioned, this stemmed from the discussion around what is changing when it comes to international students. So we had reporters heading out to the different universities to talk to students. So we will hear that a little bit later through the CBC's Jim Agapito, so stay tuned. for that. It is 13 minutes now to 7 o'clock. It's minus 11 in Winnipeg. It's minus 13 in Brandon. It's minus 22 in Thompson. And I don't actually have any cold warnings to tell you about for a change, which is nice this morning. Before we continue to talk federal politics, as I mentioned, that's coming up, let's have a bit of music. This comes from Tracy Bone, Manitoba singer-songwriter, who's been a long-time talent in our province. And this tune will pick us up on this Tuesday morning. Interruptions on right now. Stay tuned. We are going to announce some ticket winners this morning, and throughout the week we have tickets on all of our shows that we're giving away to that local gathering of different musicians. So very cool to have that festival going on, Interruption, in January. Next on the show, let's talk politics. As I mentioned, the federal Liberals are holding their cabinet retreat. They were in Montreal Sunday night. They will be huddling up until tomorrow. The meeting and announcements are happening in the shadow of low polling numbers, however, indicating some voters may be moving their support away from the Liberals. For more on this, Ryan Tumulty is with us, parliamentary reporter with the National Post. Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's actually get right into what we've heard so far. Then we'll get to Liberal support or lack of it. Immigration Minister Mark Miller, we've all been talking about it. Yesterday during our show, it came out officially. He capped the number of international students allowed to come to Canada. So he announced that's happening. How is the government framing this initiative?
Yeah, so Miller especially is framing this as something where the Liberal government really had no choice. He's been talking since the fall that he thinks the system has gotten out of hand, that there are too many students coming in, and that too many of them are going to, private colleges that really aren't offering a lot when it comes to an education, but are suggesting to applicants that as international students, they'll be able to be on a path to permanent residency. So what they're selling is not really the education, but the chance for a permanent residency or a citizenship even in Canada.
No, please continue, yeah.
Yeah, and so he says that the provinces should have addressed this, and that, he is stepping in now because he really doesn't have any other choice. He has to use this blunt instrument of a cap to slow down this program.
What is standing out for you with respect to specific announcements that have been coming out of this retreat?
Well, I mean, obviously the international student one is big, and that's on a big issue. It ties into housing, and there's a lot of questions there. But I was interested to see them actually take on a smaller issue. So on Sunday night, they started the retreat. They announced an auto theft task force. We've seen a big spike in auto thefts in some of the major cities, especially Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal. And these vehicles seem to be ending up exported overseas. And that story has started to hit the news everywhere now. And I think, it's not a huge issue. It's not something like pharmacare or, military readiness. But it is the kind of issue, I think, that makes Canadians feel a little less safe in their communities. So I was interested to see the government decide to, tackle that and really lean into that issue quickly.
What's at stake then for the Liberals going into this retreat? Let's talk about their popularity or where they're looking, how they're looking in the polls and such.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of their popularity, it's severely waning, is how I would describe it right now. We're in a situation with the polls where a Conservative majority government would almost be a certainty if an election were held tomorrow. So, the Liberals will say that they're expecting the economy to turn around, to move in the right direction for them, and that voters will start to feel better about the Liberals, especially as they start to look more closely at the Conservatives, and that will improve their fortunes. But there's only so much time left for that play to work. An election is 18 months away, probably, maybe a year. But another way to think of that is that it's maybe 2 or 3 parliamentary sessions away. And that's not a lot of time to bring in new policy to really change things. So if the government doesn't want to be, passive and just wait for things to improve, they have to be seen to be doing things, and they only have so much time left.
What's your sense of, given that they're all gathering now and you get the feeling in the room, is it going to be Justin Trudeau that leads them through the next election? Are they going to be fishing around for new leadership, or is that ship sailed? Have they announced that intention yet around leadership? Because a lot of people, when parties are not looking good, they look straight to the leaders.
Yeah, I mean, the Prime Minister has said over and over and over again that he will lead this party into the next election. And certainly when I talk to Liberals, I don't hear a lot of people talking about replacing him. That said, if these poll numbers are still this bad a year from now, there's always the possibility of a change. I mean, if the Prime Minister changes his mind, he's not going to be punished by voters for changing his mind because he's not going to face voters again. So it's the one promise a politician can always break in terms of their sticking around or not. But he really set up this modern version of the Liberal Party. Most of those MPs are quite loyal to him because they owe their seat to him. And he turned around a party that, we forget, in 2014 was in 3rd place. People were talking about the potential end of it, and he turned it into the government of the last 8 years. So I don't really see him being pushed out. Whether or not he chooses to jump, I don't see that one happening either, but you never know.
We have short memories, don't we? You're absolutely right about 2014. All right, thanks very much for the analysis on the retreat today and more. Appreciate having you on.
Okay.
Ryan Tumulty, parliamentary reporter with the National Post. We reached him this morning in Ottawa, and we're going to hear more about what's happening in Ottawa and out of the retreat on World Report in minutes here on the national and international news on World Report. On the commute this morning, just to touch that for a moment here, it looks pretty good out there. Normal winter driving conditions on your highways. And within the city of Winnipeg, same caution that we've had. If you're walking or driving, it's just it could be a little bit icy and slick in different spots. But we're in normal winter driving conditions everywhere now. I think that most of the clearing has been done. I find now with some melting yesterday, some of the ice did slick up just once again in some of the neighborhoods. So pay attention to that, but otherwise call us if you have any major things, 788-3093. Let's get to Heather Wells, and then we'll talk weather and what's coming up further in the show. Hi, Heather.
Good morning. Well, more First Nations groups are cutting ties with the downtown Winnipeg hotel following the alleged treatment of a woman there. Video, as we told you yesterday on social media, shows a woman restrained with zip ties in the lobby of the Marlborough Hotel. Manitoba, Kuwait-Nawi, Okemakanak, the Northern Chiefs Group, has informed its members they have the right to leave if they're currently staying at the Marlborough. The Assembly of Manitoba Chief says most of the people it had staying at the hotel have been moved now to other hotels. The Winnipeg School Division says it's taking action to change the overrepresentation of Indigenous students in its suspension numbers. Data from the city's largest school division shows the majority of students suspended in the last 6 years self-identified as Indigenous. We'll hear more in our next local news coming up at 7:30.
All right. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Matt Henderson and I sat down for quite an extensive conversation about that and more. So you'll hear that as well in the show coming up in the next hour, just ahead of 8 o'clock. And part of it is also, as he spoke to me about changing the lens through which we see suspensions. So if back in the day it was, you're caught smoking, you're out. He's trying to change the lens to which we see suspensions, given what they can mean, repeated suspensions especially, to a student's learning outcomes. So how do you make those decisions then? When does a student need to be suspended? When is that the right choice, quote unquote, for all involved? And when is it not an effective tool for what it's designed to do? So part of that conversation nuance coming up in our conversation in the next hour of the show as we build on the news. In addition to the next hour of the show, 2 Winnipeg skaters are going to hit the international ice in Japan next month. We're going to talk to them about their love for speed skating and how they feel going into this trip. Right now in Winnipeg, light snow, as we mentioned, -11, and the winds this morning will be south 30 to 50. So they're kind of ruining the party of our high of -4, the winds, but bundle up and have a good morning. Thanks for spending part of it with us. We're back after World Report, and that's next at 7.
On the Current.
I'm here today to announce that I will not be leading Alberta's NDP into the next election.
Rachel Notley led the Alberta NDP to election victory in 2015, ending a 4-decade Conservative reign. Now, as she steps down as that party's leader, Rachel Notley looks at where she's leaving her party and her province. That's coming up on The Current.
The Current with Matt Galloway. This morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning from CBC News. I'm Marcia Young. Israel Defense Forces say they have Khan Yunis surrounded. They say they are destroying Hamas strongholds with targeted airstrikes and ground operations. But the Palestinian Red Crescent is describing a different situation on the ground at Al Amal Hospital. It says Israeli drones are shooting anyone who moves near the hospital. And as Abby Kodassan reports, there are echoes of that conflict playing out in the Red Sea.
That's the sound of British warplanes taking off to conduct the latest airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. It's part of a U.S.-led effort with support from Canada to stop the Houthis from attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea. Gerald Firestein is a former U.S. ambassador to Yemen. He says the Houthis have much to gain.
They're raising their profile regionally and gaining regional support as well. So they see this as a political win for themselves, and they believe that it will come at not much cost.
Previous U.S. strikes have not deterred Houthi attacks. They say only a ceasefire in Gaza will. Israel has rejected such calls even from allies. And as the country mourns 24 IDF soldiers killed in Gaza in the past day, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the war will continue until absolute victory. A Netanyahu biographer, Anshel Pfeffer, says there is growing anger inside Israel over what he calls the government's ineptitude in handling the war.
The idea of Hamas being totally destroyed is obviously an empty idea. And Netanyahu is just using these words to try and cover up for a lack of strategy on his part.
An American outlet, Axios, is reporting that Israel has offered Hamas a 2-month pause in fighting as part of a deal to release all remaining hostages. Neither Netanyahu nor Hamas officials have confirmed that such a proposal is even on the table. Abby Kodassan, CBC News, London.
I think New Hampshire is going to surprise everybody and that Nikki is going to be the candidate.
That is Valerie Maxwell, one of the first voters to cast her ballot in the New Hampshire Republican primary. The small town of Dixville Notch began voting at around midnight. All 6 votes cast there went to Nikki Haley. She is Donald Trump's only competitor for the nomination. As the CBC's Paul Hunter tells us, it could be a make-or-break day for the former South Carolina governor.
I am so excited. It's been almost a year that we've been campaigning in this great state.
Nikki Haley may be the last challenger to Donald Trump left standing in this contest, but most observers believe it would be a stunner if she were to now overtake him and win in New Hampshire or beyond.
The surge people were talking about a couple of weeks ago has crested.
Even though voter turnout is expected to hit record levels in this primary, New Hampshire political scientist Chris Galdieri says for Haley to win now, she'd need Trump supporters and a huge amount of independent voters to suddenly swing her way at the last minute.
And it just doesn't look like either of those things is likely to happen.
But we'll finish it off. This could end it. Get the big vote, it ends it. This could end it.
Indeed, as voters cast their ballots this morning, Trump's confidence is reflected by earlier polls that show him with a commanding lead in New Hampshire and elsewhere, even as he continues to face multiple legal challenges in criminal and civil courts. All of it strengthening the view already that it will be he who, despite his battles, will ultimately take on Joe Biden for the White House this fall. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Concord, New Hampshire.
In Terrace, British Columbia, 3 people have been killed in a heli-skiing accident. Northern Escape Heli-Ski says one of its helicopters crashed near the west central city. It happened around 4 o'clock local time yesterday afternoon. 4 other people are in hospital with critical injuries. David Jeffson speaks for the search and rescue team that coordinated the response.
Precautions were all in place to make sure that ambulances were there, and precautions were also in place for Mills Memorial to be on standby for possible multiple subjects.
In a statement, the company wrote to CBC News saying it is focused on the safety of guests, staff, and guides. At least 20 people are now confirmed dead in a landslide in a remote region of China. It happened in the southwestern Yunnan province. Another 24 people are also presumed missing. More than 1,000 rescuers are working through the snow and freezing temperatures to find them. In Ayodhya, northern India, people pushed through a police line to get close to the Ram Temple. It opened to the public for the first time today. Hundreds of thousands of people have gathered in the city to see the new Hindu temple. Its location has become a source of criticism. It sits on the land of a centuries-old mosque destroyed more than 30 years ago. Hindus believe the site is the birthplace of Lord Ram, one of the religion's most sacred deities. Liberal cabinet ministers will wrap up their cabinet retreat in Montreal today. Parliament resumes next week. So Justin Trudeau and his ministers have been talking policy and how to face constant attacks from the Conservative opposition. Tom Perry has the details.
We've been focusing on the issues that matter most to Canadians.
Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland says this cabinet retreat has been all about housing, the cost of living, and jobs. Polls suggest Canadians are losing faith in the Liberals on these issues. Freeland says she knows people are frustrated.
Canadians have economic whiplash. It has been a really hard time.
Freeland says the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and inflation have rattled people across the country. But Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says if Canadians are angry, there's only one person to blame, and that's Justin Trudeau.
Can you think of anything he hasn't screwed up?
Liberals have been trying to find ways to counter Poilievre's attacks. Health Minister Mark Holland says he's confident voters will see through what he calls the Conservatives' circus show.
You know, Poilievre is saying all we have to do is change one thing, get rid of a price on pollution, everything's fixed.
Ministers kick off the final day of their retreat this morning with more talk about those big issues, including Canada-U.S. relations and the possibility of Donald Trump returning to the White House, as Liberals try, yet again, to hone their message and win back those frustrated voters. Tom Perry, CBC News, Montreal.
Canada Post is selling its IT and logistics business. Some experts say that's the right move. The mail service is trying to save itself financially. It has lost nearly $500 million in recent years. Last week, the Crown Corporation announced the sale of its IT company, InnovaPost, to Deloitte Canada. Ian Lee has written extensively about Canada Post's decline.
Canada Post is disappearing before our eyes. Letter mail is collapsing. What they're doing is starting to restructure because they're starting to finally face that reality.
Lee says if Canada Post wants to save itself, it needs to aggressively enter the e-commerce market. But he says the company would be late to the game. E-commerce is now dominated by companies like Amazon. She was a trailblazer who fought to abolish slavery. Marianne Shad Carey was one of the most outspoken Black women to fight for the freedom and rights of enslaved people in the mid-1800s. She dedicated her life to promoting equality across North America. As CBC's Meg Roberts tells us, her legacy is now being remembered with a stamp.
I had never heard of her before.
It was a trip to the museum in North Buxton, a community outside Chatham, Ontario, one of the last stops on the Underground Railroad that brought African American slaves to freedom in Canada. It was here Adrienne Shad found out about her great-great-great-aunt, Marianne Shad Carey.
I was absolutely astounded.
Astounded at the magnitude of her ancestor's life. Marianne Shad Carey was born into a family of Delaware abolitionists in 1823. She moved to what is now Windsor, Ontario, and opened a school for freedom seekers, later becoming the publisher and editor of the Provincial Freeman, an anti-slavery newspaper.
She seemed fearless in her endeavors, and I don't think I have that courage even in the 21st century.
A lifetime of firsts. The first Black woman in North America to publish and edit a newspaper, the first Black woman to enter law school in the United States, and now she'll be featured on a Canada Post stamp, part of the organization's Black History collection.
Honestly, I felt like it was long overdue.
Irene Moore Davis, a relative of Shad Carey's and a Windsor historian and author, says Canadians need to know more about her life to understand our nation's history.
Canada is a place where we have kind of a certain concept of who our founders were, who our pioneers were, and we need to disrupt that idea.
The new stamp will be unveiled later today. Meg Roberts, CBC News, Windsor.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Good morning, Manitoba, and hello, Winnipeg. -11 downtown right now. I'm Marcy Marcusa. We are in our CBC studios on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or YouTube. Lots of ways to find us, and thanks for joining us this morning. More weather traffic in a moment. Also this hour, morning sports. And speaking of sports, there's two Winnipeg skaters, speed skaters. They're heading off to Japan next month to compete in the World Junior Speed Skating Championships. We're going to talk to them about how they feel, how they got into speed skating, and about their ongoing success. Once you hear their names, you might already know who they are. They've just been tearing up the oval, so stay tuned. That's coming up at 7:40. And then a little bit later in the hour, as part of our series on youth violence, we're turning our attention to what's happening in schools and with suspension rates. In Winnipeg's largest school division, some numbers have been released by the division. We'll hear more about who's being suspended and why. We're also going to talk more about the view on suspension as that data is tracked by the Winnipeg's largest school division. And the superintendent had a lengthy conversation with me, so we'll have that part of it on as it relates to suspensions this hour on the show. Right now, Heather Wells joins us with news updates and other stories. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, the head of Assiniboine Community College in Brandon believes the country is caught up in a scrap between Ottawa and Ontario over international students. Mark Frison says the federal cap on international students' permits is a concern for this province. He says the number of international students at ACC has exploded in the last decade to more than 20% of the total population of that college. A Point Douglas woman says it's the neighbors who are suffering from a bureaucratic nightmare preventing the demolition of the burned-out Vulcan Ironworks site. Catherine Flynn says the entire community is in danger from asbestos and repeated fires. We're going to hear the latest from that story coming up in our next local news at 7:30.
All right. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Well, let's get into the forecast now. Abby Adiemi.
Right now in Winnipeg, it's currently minus 11 degrees for the rest of today. Expect mainly cloudy skies with a chance of light snow. The wind, which is currently picking up, will be coming in from the south, and we're looking at a high of -4 for today. As the night approaches, it's going to be a continuation of that mainly cloudy conditions with a chance of snow still coming our way and a risk of a freezing drizzle. The south wind will persist and temperature is going to be rising to -3 by tomorrow morning. But right now it's currently -11 in Winnipeg.
You got your scarf on.
Yeah, I know.
I love that you're representing the Manitoba Moose. It's your moose scarf.
It's my moose scarf. Yeah, I know.
We don't talk enough about the Manitoba Moose.
That's the reason I have this on today.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I kind of like that. I like that, Abby. Abby always repping everybody.
I know.
Quietly on that side of the glass. Look at him. Corey Funk.
Yeah, so far right now, the commute's been pretty quiet. I did just get a call on the commuter line with a good heads up from Samina. They said that they're on Waverly, Cordon and Waverly, southbound Cordon. There's barricades up blocking the sidewalk at Waverly, but also the exit onto Waverly from southbound Cordon. You can carry through, obviously, southbound Cordon and Waverly, but you just can't turn onto it because of the barricade that's up there. So heads up. Thanks for that call. Other than that, things seem to be going fairly smoothly out there on this morning commute. It is probably going to be a little slippery in some places. Things kind of heat up and cool, especially as things start to warm up over the next few days. So just heads up for that. If you see something going on, though, just be like Samina. Give me a call on the CBC commuter line. I'll let folks know whether you're walking, biking, driving. Love to see what you're seeing out there. 204-788-3093.
You know what I don't do enough of?
What's that?
Go and see live music.
Oh.
We went outside the Burt to that big, block party thing this year.
Yep.
And my husband and I turned into kids again. We were just smiling. We had the best time. And we reminded each other. And I know the pandemic interrupted things, but when you go out and see music, and our town is full of it, right? It's just, it really does lift the spirits.
Ever since we had our kid, we've been kind of like the homebound. We finally able to leave him with the grandparents to go to a concert at Park Theater. We saw Dizzy a couple months ago, and it was the same thing. We felt like we were like kids again, and just that you just can't beat live music. You just can't.
Right now, there's lots of great stuff going on when it comes to live music because Winterruption's on. We've been talking about it a bit, and we have tickets that we've been giving away. Yesterday, we just forgot to announce winners who are going to be heading out this week to the Sunny War concert at the West End Cultural Center. It's on Saturday. It's part of Winterruption, and that is Kyla, Chris, and Ken. So obviously, Corey off air has contacted you, and you've won our tickets. Stay tuned, though, not just Information Radio, but to all of our local programs, Radio Noon and Up to Speed as well, all this week, because we have even more Winterruption tickets to give away. So if you feel like Corey and I, that it just lifts your spirits when you get out there and you check out a concert, you make sure you're close to your radio. Well, to serious matters now, and a warning that the details in our first story are distressing to many. A video of an Indigenous woman being restrained with her hands tied behind her back at a local hotel is causing outrage among the many Indigenous communities. The video was taken on December 25th. We were talking about it yesterday. It came out over the weekend. It shows a distraught woman in the lobby of the Marlborough Hotel in Winnipeg. She is trying to leave the building. She is seen being detained by several men. Her way out is blocked by several men. According to Winnipeg police, the woman was carrying a knife and had threatened people before she was detained by hotel security. Police are investigating the incident, which prompted a rally at the hotel on Sunday. Now, the protest included representatives from the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, the Southern Chiefs Organization, and Manitoba Kiwetnawi Okimakanak. Kathy Merrick is the Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. And yesterday we played what she spoke about in that lobby. And we've been trying to reach her for the show. Late in the day, Faith Fundel did reach her for Up to Speed for an important conversation. So we want you to hear that. She spoke with Faith, as I mentioned, yesterday afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
What is it about what has happened, the reaction from people and everything else following that's caused this outrage? What do you make of that?
The people were angry at the fact that there was a video that was circulating TikTok and Facebook and whatnot, and it was very disturbing. Actually, it was very heartbreaking to see the video.
What was it about what you saw that you gather from people and from your experiences? What was it that you saw and heard that made it so heartbreaking?
That she was actually zip tied behind her back with both hands, and she was yelling for help, and you could just hear the fear in her voice and crying and whatnot. It was very disturbing.
Winnipeg Police issued a statement on Twitter today, and I'm going to read what it says. It says, "There's been plenty of discussions on social media feeds concerning a video recorded December 25th at a Winnipeg hotel and a subsequent assembly at the hotel. There are serious allegations being made, and we are committed to investigating them, also committed to sharing factual and accurate information as the investigation progresses." Grand Chief, what do you know about what happened?
Well, what I do know and what was, we are waiting for actually the Winnipeg Police to get back to us, because we relayed the information to them, and they said that they were presently investigating, but the young woman was charged, but actually wasn't convicted. So that's where we're at in terms of the Winnipeg Police Service updating the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs.
In terms of what you know, can you take us through what you know? A lot of folks are asking those same questions, wondering what happened. Can you take us through what you know?
Well, what I know, this young woman is from a northern community, and she left her community to come out for a medical appointment. And where she is from, she has to fly to Winnipeg. Our people have to stay in hotels or medical boarding homes when they come to the city to access medical services. So that's what happened to her, and I'm assuming she was placed at the Marlborough Inn for that duration of time, but wasn't able to get back home.
There's
or she wasn't allowed into the Marlborough Hotel.
There's some conflicting information that we're also receiving. We understand that her brother was staying at the hotel for a medical appointment, and she was there for a visit. I want to talk, Grand Chief.
Maybe I can correct that as well, because a lot of times when our people come out, a lot of times they have escorts. So it's able to assist the person that came out for a medical appointment to ensure that they be able to speak for them if there's barriers in the health system.
And so your understanding is her brother was there to assist her.
Correct.
Have you spoken to her?
Actually, I haven't, but what I do know is she wants to speak to me. And she's up in Cross Lake. Arrangements are presently being made for her to be able to come to the city and to be able to share her story with me. So I don't know when that's going to happen, but when it does happen, I will meet with her.
The Marlborough Hotel put out a statement saying that the woman was, quote, intoxicated and brandishing a knife, unquote, when she was detained. That they were only trying to protect their staff. Well, what do you make of that statement?
I can't really comment on that statement, since it's still under investigation. But what shouldn't have happened is for her to be zip-tied by 4 male security.
What do you think would have been a better way to handle that situation?
I think the security people should have, when they're dealing with women, that they should have female security as well. So it takes us to another conversation where we can, where we be able to start training our own people to be security guards in the city. I don't think that was ever done previously. I do appreciate the fact that the Bear Clan does a lot of good work here in the city. So, and we can do that. We can train our own people to be security guards and to be culturally sensitive to our people.
How do you think that this might impact the relationship between First Nations and hotel vendors?
Well, they need to know that they have to be culturally sensitive to our people, and that they be able to ensure that we get the same service as everybody else that comes through the doors of hotels and medical boarding homes and whatnot.
What are you hoping people will take from this conversation? There are lots of questions that people have.
Well, I know a lot of times as a political organization, we have done a lot of work to try to educate society, and we've done a lot of work in the landfill search, and we've done a lot of work trying to educate people as to we're not dispensable, and that kind of triggered me as well to seeing a young woman having her hands tied behind her back. And so we have to be very careful as to how we treat people, and that our women deserve to be in a safe place. Our women deserve to be looked after in a good way.
Kathy Merrick, Grand Chief of Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, speaking there with Up to Speed host Faith Fundal. Now, to read the latest on this story on our website, as there were developments, a lot of them through the day yesterday, which led up to that conversation between Faith and Kathy Merrick. Please read all the stories, cbc.ca/Manitoba online.
There are stories you just can't stop thinking about. They take you somewhere, they introduce you to someone, they share something new with you. Liftoff. Those are the stories you want to share with your friends, and CBC's award-winning documentary team is bringing them to you every week on Storylines. Storylines, new this season on CBC Radio 1, and always on demand on the CBC Listen app.
Julie, good morning. Thanks for calling the commuter line about a stalled bus on westbound William at Sherbrooke in the curb lane. So westbound William at Sherbrooke in the curb lane, stalled bus. They left to get around. No big backups yet, according to when Julie called. So not sure if it's still there or yet cleared. But if you want to update that, 788-3093. Otherwise, good winter driving conditions out there on the highways and in the city. And -11 is our temperature in Winnipeg. Well, it's 7:25. It is time for morning sports. Scott Regehr joins us now. Hello there.
Happy Tuesday to you.
Happy Tuesday to you. So the Jets having a chance to make history last night in Boston. How'd it go?
Not the way they would have liked. A relatively shaky game for Connor Hellebuyck, Marcy. He gave up 3 goals and just 20 shots. Then with Hellebuyck on the bench for an extra attacker, Boston's Brad Marchand scored an empty netter to salt away the win for the Bruins. 4-1 the final. So that snaps the streak of 34 games, giving up 3 or fewer goals. The last time Winnipeg lost by this kind of margin was November 2nd. Now, defenseman Dylan DeMello does point out that Boston capitalized on Hellebuyck not being between the pipes for that final goal.
Empty netter, so is there an asterisk on it? I don't know. We'll see. We'll talk about it. But, yeah, I mean, you know what? It was a great streak. It's time to get it going again. So, we got a lot to learn from a game like this going forward. So we, get some rest and another big game in Toronto.
Yeah, one other note, Marcy, as the Jets head to TO for a game on Wednesday, Gabriel Velarde was a late scratch with what is being described as a lower body injury. Head coach Rick Bowness could not say whether he will be available for tomorrow night's game against the Leafs.
You know what I like? I like the tone of the Jets, because great teams don't sound defeated when they lose.
Yeah.
So, and in this season, the Jets have had bouts of real losing bouts, right? And then lots of streaks of winning now coming back. So
where they haven't sound overly jubilant either, right?
Yeah.
It's avoiding the too high, too low thing. Yeah,
You're
I agree
right.
with you.
Yeah, that even-tempered thing. I'm hearing that in these Jets this year.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to footy. More upheaval at Soccer Canada.
Allison Walker, we never even knew you. On the day Walker was set to start her role, Marcy, as General Secretary of Soccer Canada, she instead announced her resignation. On her LinkedIn account, she wrote, quote, "After careful consideration and conversation with my family, I have decided for personal reasons not to step into the role." End quote. Regardless of why she's stepping down, Marcy, this is a major blow for soccer's governing body. Walker, who was headhunted over 200 other applicants, was set to find a new coach for the national men's team, who've been without one since John Herdman left his post. This is a massive decision since that coach will be expected to lead Canada into the next World Cup, which the country is going to co-host in just 2 years' time. So for the interim, Mauro Biello is going to continue to hold down that position. If you include Alison Walker, 3 people have now occupied the role of General Secretary over the past 12 months, Jason DeVos and Earl Cochrane being the others. The turmoil at the top, so soon before Canada hosts the world's biggest sporting event, has led to more than a few cynical comments online, many suggesting Walker took one look at Soccer Canada's books and changed her mind about the gig pretty quickly. Meanwhile, The Athletic's Josh Cloke reports Walker's resignation is due to an undisclosed health-related issue.
Let's finish with something completely different, a memorable night in the NBA.
Yeah, although not entirely memorable where the Raptors are concerned. They lost to Memphis, a third straight defeat for Toronto, which now replaces the Grizzlies as the league's 6th worst team in the standings. Canadian R.J. Barrett led Toronto in the loss with 29 points and then told reporters it's a very good thing they now have a few days off because it would be nice if all these recently acquired players through trades could have a practice together, something they haven't had yet. So now to someone, Marcy, well-practiced in humiliating his foes.
Embiid, coast to coast for 70! Franchise history here tonight.
That is a nice round number.
Joel Embiid with 70 points in Philadelphia's win over San Antonio. No player, not even Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain, has scored more as a 76er. Embiid's effort came 18 years to the day that Kobe Bryant scored 81 points in Toronto against the Raptors. So Embiid, Bryant, and Chamberlain, they're all part of one of the league's most elite groups, those who've scored 70-plus in a game. 9 players now belong to that group.
Sweet. Fun for basketball fans. Thank you.
You betcha.
That is Scott Regier with Morning Sports. He's back again tomorrow at 7:25. We're coming into news time now. I'm Marcy Marcusa. Well, we do have a story that's about sports after the news, an interview with 2 Manitobans who are ones to watch. 2 speed skaters from our province. They're going to be heading to Japan next month to compete in the World Junior Speed Skating Championships. We're going to talk to them about how they feel and also a little bit of their backstory about how they got into the sport. So stay with us for that interview. If you need us on the commute, 788-3093, and your CBC Winnipeg News is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 7:30, it's -11, and Winnipeg warms way up today. A high of -4, with a bit of a south wind developing as well. The head of Assiniboine Community College in Brandon believes the country is caught up in a scrap between Ottawa and Ontario over international students. Mark Frison says the federal cap on international student permits is a concern for Manitoba.
Ottawa's way of addressing that, because they can't get Ontario to move, is to bring in national measures that potentially sideswipe the rest of the country. And so, at some level, it's unfortunate that the difficulties in one province are now having implications for all the others.
Frison says the number of international students at ACC has exploded in the last decade to more than 20% of the college's total population. Frison says Ottawa should open up visas and permits for apprenticeship programs. He says those international students could help fill workforce gaps in Canada for things like building housing. More First Nations groups are cutting ties with a downtown Winnipeg hotel following the alleged treatment of a woman there. Video on social media shows a woman restrained with zip ties in the lobby of the Marlborough Hotel. Manitoba Kuwaitnawi Okamakinak, the Northern Chiefs Group, has informed its members they have the right to leave if they're currently staying at the Marlborough. The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs says most of the people it had staying at the hotel have been moved to other hotels. Grand Chief Kathy Merrick says the video raises serious concerns.
For the management of the hotel and for the workers in the hotel to have that abuse of power. And so that does not sit well with any leader in terms of how this young lady was being treated. So if she's being treated like that, are they treating our other people like that?
Merrick wants hotel staff to receive sensitivity training, and she'd like to see more First Nations people trained as guards. She also says it's time to offer First Nations people more health care services in their home communities. The Winnipeg School Division says it is taking action to change the overrepresentation of Indigenous students in its suspension numbers. Data from the city's largest school division show the majority of students suspended in the last 6 years self-identified as Indigenous. Indigenous students represent only 30% of the student population. Superintendent Matt Henderson says more needs to be done to support Indigenous students.
They're overwhelmingly overrepresented, and so what we have to sort of say is, let's take a step back at that and look at, how we decolonize our schools.
Henderson says Winnipeg School Division has hired a divisional kukum and is hiring more Indigenous principals, teachers, and staff. As well, he says they're revamping R.B. Russell High School to provide training to people in the community to work in the school system. 3 people are dead. 4 others rushed to hospital in critical condition after a helicopter crash north of Terrace, BC. Happened yesterday, and the chopper belonged to Northern Escape Heliskiing. The company's president, John Forrest, in a statement says it's impossible to put into words the profound grief we feel and the sorrow our guests and staff share. The Israeli military says 21 Israeli soldiers have been killed in a single incident in Gaza.
נפלו 21 לוחמי מילואים.
That is IDF spokesperson saying it is the largest single incident loss of life for the Israeli military since the start of the war. At the same time, the Hamas-run health ministry says in Gaza, at least 195 Palestinians have died in the territory in the past 24 hours. The deaths come as Israeli troops now have encircled Khan Yunis. It calls the city a Hamas stronghold. You can hear more national and international news coming up on World Report at 8. A Point Douglas woman says it's the neighbors suffering from a bureaucratic nightmare preventing the demolition of the burned-out Vulcan Ironworks site. Vulcan's owner says he can't go ahead with the demolition because the city and province are giving him conflicting orders. The city telling him to demolish the buildings. The province says the demolition must be done with water because there's asbestos in those old pipes. But it's too cold. Catherine Flynn says the entire community is in danger from the asbestos and repeated fires.
Having these buildings sit for months and months and months in the middle of a residential community looking like a war zone is not acceptable, and they're going to have to do something to make the process a little more streamlined.
An appeal by Vulcan's owner will be heard by the city next month. Well, the Jets' streak has ended. Vlad Nemesnikov in the first period on Sportsnet, a tying goal, but the only Jets puck to find the net last night in Boston. The Bruins beat Winnipeg 4-1, and that ends the Jets' streak of allowing 3 or fewer goals in 34 games. Jets head coach Rick Bowness says it was probably one of the worst games his team has played in a long time.
It was a tough game. It was a grinded-out game, but the best period we put in was the third, and you would hope you get that second goal. We didn't get it.
Next up, the Jets head to Toronto for a matchup against the Leafs tomorrow night. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Heather Wells, I'm about to interview 2 young speed skaters who are having great success. Have you ever tried speed skating yourself?
Are you kidding? I can barely stand up on skates.
Really? I didn't know that about you. We've never had this conversation, I don't think.
I'm great at skating backwards for some reason, but forwards is a different story.
You and I should go out together because I can't skate a lick backwards, but I can move forward pretty competently. So
see, we need each other.
Okay, Abby Adiyemi, can you stop on skates? Maybe the three of us will make one person.
You know, it was on my bucket list, and remember Pat and I did something 2 years ago. And
you went out to try.
That's the last time, because I was also heading south. I was moving south, backwards.
All right, well, our guests have nothing to fear from us, obviously. But man, it's such a wonderful thing to do. And you're about to tell us, Abby, that the forecast is going to cooperate if people are wanting to get out and learn to skate, or if try to skate on some of the rinks out there?
Yes, if you're trying to learn to skate or get out, I'll tell you one thing, we are warming up. So that's a good sign. But let's just talk about the current temps, and then I'll let you know how it feels out there. It's currently -11 in the downtown part of Winnipeg, and we will be warming up all the way to -4 today. For all those already outside, you can feel the difference. You're like, why did I layer up this much this morning? Because I was like, I had my scarf, and then I got into the car, I'm like, oh, okay. So I didn't really need much heat in the car. So it tells that we're warming up.
Yeah, I left my scarf at home.
I should have, but anyway, I had it on today, so I'm still going to take it. Winnipeg is currently at -11. If we look at Brandon is currently at -12 with light snow. There's going to be heading to -4 today. Thompson is currently at -21, mostly cloudy there, and that 60% of light snow wave coming your way, and you're heading to a high of -14. Good morning, Churchill. You're currently at -24 with partly cloudy skies, and then the snow is going to be beginning later this morning. Churchill is expecting about 2 to 4 centimeters of snow, and you'll be heading to a high of -16. There's also a risk of frost bite. Don't forget that. The Interlake region, Gimli is currently at -13, heading to a high of -4. Dauphin is currently at -12, heading to a high of -5. Steinbach is currently at -8 with light snow, heading to a high of -4. And Morris is currently at -9, and the rest of the Pembina Valley region is seeing a light snow. You'll be heading to a high of -4 today. But right now, Winnipeg is currently at -11.
So I have to show some strings here for a second, because if people heard, they may have heard Corey a little bit in the background talking to our next guest, working on the phone while you're doing weather. But what I think is funny is on radio, that's one thing, whether you heard it or not. But now we're on television and streaming. So, like, were you hiding under the desk?
I was. Clearly, it didn't work. I literally was like under the desk trying to hide my voice, but clearly it made it through. So this is a new learning that I.
So on YouTube, people are just seeing your butt in the air, or what?
Yeah, exactly. I need like a little like soundproof blanket I put over myself to get guests on the phone or something like that.
We'll work on that.
We'll work on that.
Now, you were on the phone with guests and not with traffic tips. The traffic line's been pretty quiet, eh?
Been pretty quiet. There has been a few calls that's worth letting folks know about. Just got a call from Julie about maybe 10 minutes or so ago, 10, 15 minutes or so ago. She said there's a stalled bus westbound William at Sherbrooke in the curb lane. So stay left to get around that. It wasn't causing too big of backups, but just heads up that may, as traffic picks up, cause some backups for folks. Stay left there. As well, Samina called and said that southbound Cordon at Waverly, there's some barricades up keeping you from turning onto Waverly. As well, there's a barricade on the sidewalk. So look out for that. That's if you're heading down southbound Cordon at Waverly. Otherwise, been a fairly smooth commute so far. But if you're out there, you're walking, you're biking, you're driving, you're skating, why not? Give me a call on the CBC commuter line. That number 204-788-3093.
Well, 18-year-old Sophia Bieber and 16-year-old Skylar Van Horn are skating a lot. They will represent Manitoba at the World Junior Speed Skating Championships next month in Japan, an international competition. Both are being recognized for their performances at the Canadian Junior Long Track Championships. They took place earlier this month. So Bieber won that title last season, finished first in the 1,000 meters, second in both the 500 meters and 1,500 meters, and is on the line now. Good morning, Sophia.
Good morning. How are you guys?
I'm well. I'm excited to talk to you about this. And Van Horn took home silver in the 1,000 meters, bronze in the 500, 1,500 meters, and 3,000 meters. Amazing. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So, Sophia, this is your second time going with an international team, but how are you feeling about going to Japan?
Yeah, I'm really excited. I've never been to Japan before, let alone Asia. I think it's going to be a really unique international experience.
You've been speed skating now for how many years?
I believe this is my 9th year.
Yeah. What got you into it? I know I read you were inspired and one of your mentors is Cindy Clausen, but why did you start in the first place?
My parents actually put me into it. My mom used to speed skate, and my sister had already started speed skating, so they just wanted me to try it, and it kind of took off from there.
Do you have your sights on Olympics? Because other Canadian junior champs went on to, win all colors of medals at the Olympics.
Of course. Most speed skaters do have their sights on the Olympics, so I'm definitely still trying to reach that goal of mine.
Now, before I turn my attention to Skylar, do you have any advice for what it might be like, given that you've been on an international speed skating team before, for what Skylar can be preparing for here?
Oh, that's a great question. It's just a lot of fun. It's a really different experience to get to meet so many new people and just have fun.
Skylar, how are you feeling about it? Congratulations on all of your success as well.
Thank you. I'm definitely super excited to travel overseas because I've never done that before. But there's a little nerve-wracking race against the best juniors in the world, but I'm definitely super excited and I'm going to have so much fun.
And how did you get into it here in Manitoba speed skating? Or maybe you didn't start here?
I did start here. Similar to Sophia, I got into the sport through my dad because he was also a speed skater, and same as Sophia, it's stuck with me ever since.
What is it about speed skating that you've loved? Because obviously we're in a winter province and you can choose a lot of sports. Despite the fact that your family's had lineage in this sport, what do you feel like when you're on speed skates specifically?
Well, it's definitely super fast. As a kid, I grew a passion for the sport, and it grew since I was little. And I definitely stayed majority for the people surrounding the sport, my teammates, the volunteers, my coaches. They're definitely super supportive, and it's just a great environment to be in.
For you, Skylar, what are your goals as you head into this competition, your goals personally as an athlete?
Personally, it's just to get as much experience as I can. Traveling internationally, I've never done it before, so just seeing what that's like, meeting a bunch of new people, racing against people I've never raced before, and just trying my best and seeing how far I can go.
Sophia, what are your thoughts on the popularity of the sport in Canada in terms of speed skating and the attention that it gets in the face of other winter sports?
Yeah, so speed skating is definitely an underrepresented sport, I believe, in Canada. It's a lot bigger in other countries, but it's definitely smaller in Canada. And I really hope I get to watch the sport grow as I grow older.
Can we just talk for a moment about the fact that we have a lot of women who are successful athletes in this sport and so many role models to choose from, right? How inspiring is that, Sophia, for you as a young woman athlete?
Oh, it's very inspiring. I get to see these women do what I do and have success with it. So it's always something I look forward to, or I look up to every day.
And Skylar, for you, how important is to have, women role models in your sport?
I think it's very important because it's something for you to aspire to be, and just watch someone else's success gives you the opportunity to be able to succeed yourself in the future. And I think it's just very positive for little girls to see this woman doing great in the sport that they want to do great in one day.
What are your goals, Sophia, at this competition then, personally speaking?
My goals at this competition are personally to race the best races I can, hopefully place higher, but I'm not looking at placing too well just because I am going into this international competition as I guess a little baby. But yeah, I'm just excited to have fun.
We were actually talking about what people would like to see our tax dollars spent on in our winter city as the city budget's coming up next month. But somebody wrote in and said, why don't we cover the speed skating oval? And I'm wondering what the two of you would think about that. I'm guessing you've had quite a number of cold mornings out there, Skylar.
Oh, yeah. It was actually really nice at the beginning of the season, but recently it's gotten really cold. And so if the oval was covered, that'd be amazing because you could definitely skate whenever you wanted, and you wouldn't have to, gauge how much you're doing in practice based on, the temperature, the wind outside. Yeah,
we wouldn't have to lose everybody to Calgary for practices and such and training, because that's what happens sometimes as well, right, as you advance. Would that make a difference, actually, Sophia, to cover the oval here?
Yeah, I think it would make a huge difference. It would provide a lot more opportunities for speed skaters as we'd be able to skate longer. And I think it'd just be better for training as well.
Well, big dreams. But right now we'll let you chase your dreams to Japan, you two. Thank you very much for being with us. Good luck, Skylar, over there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and Sophia, thank you very much for being with us as well. Congrats on your success.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for having me.
Sophia Bieber and Skylar Van Horn, speed skaters. They'll be at the World Junior Speed Skating Championships in Japan next month. They happen February 9th to 11th.
Just how does a plant become illegal? Terry O'Reilly is one toke over the line, leaving no stone unturned, exploring the history of cannabis and how it's marketed. From high-end retail stores now selling expensive paraphernalia to celebrities who have their own brands. On Under the Influence, Thursday morning at 11:30, 3:30 p.m. in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
7:46 a.m. the time right now. It's -11 in Winnipeg, and next on the show, we return to our ongoing series on youth violence. Now, we are looking today specifically at suspension rates at Winnipeg's largest school division. Students get suspended, of course, for many reasons, but most often it is students physically assaulting other students. It's violence. So how safe are kids and teens in school, and what is behind the violence? The Winnipeg School Division has nearly 30,000 students, and there were 743 suspensions in the 2022-23 school year. That is below pre-pandemic rates, but the number is creeping up. Matt Henderson is the division's new superintendent. We sat down for a lengthy interview last week on a number of different issues. On this topic, he says the Winnipeg School Division tries to avoid suspending students. And let's start with him explaining why.
Students do make mistakes because here are adolescents and early adolescents. They're going to make mistakes. Their brains aren't fully formed, and even adults with fully formed brains make big mistakes. But what we're saying is sometimes when a student makes a mistake, they actually have to be part of community even more. And so we're having conversations with all of our principals and vice principals and in the community to say, can we look at suspensions as kind of the last resort, the last thing that we're going to do before, before all the other beautiful things we can say to a child. Hey, you need to make reparations, you need to make amends, or hey, your behavior is actually communicating something, and we have to interpret what you're telling us. Having said that, as a former principal, there are times where we got to let air out of the tire in a school. When there's a big event, sometimes we have to say, to a family, look, we need a couple days on this because,
So suspensions have a place, so that's what you're saying?
Once in a while, depending on the degree of violence. If it's a small child, we're saying, well, that's not, suspending a child isn't an appropriate measure if the child is in grade 4 or 5. And what we're doing in Winnipeg School Division is taking a one student at a time approach where, we'll look at the individual circumstances. If we are telling kids that you can't be part of community and you actually have to be away, someone's coming in to replace school and providing an alternative.
But if there has been a violent incident involving a student, what does it mean for staff or teachers who are saying, I was in the middle of that, or I witnessed that, or I have to manage this student now, and it was quite violent, and I would feel better if there was a suspension here?
100%, yeah, and that we're on that journey right now as Winnipeg School Division. We can't just say, hey, don't suspend kids, and good luck. That would be irresponsible. So we're engaging with all sorts of community partners about how is it that we provide really powerful professional development on restorative justice, on brain development, on really what are the tools on our tool belt that we can use to diffuse, but then bring kids back together into community to say, hey, I'm sorry. How do I repair this relationship? So I take your point on that it can't just be, we want to curb suspension data, so we're just going to stop suspending. But I understand that as a teacher, as a principal, I've been in some heavy instances where it's like, whoa, that was intense.
Or your sense of safety is affected as well.
Absolutely.
Suspension rates, of course, don't reflect all violent acts, but they do give us somewhat of a snapshot. They are part of this conversation. What are some of the most common reasons for suspensions in your data?
In our data, a lot of it is violence. Students violence on other students, but it's rare. That's a rare circumstance. Not to say that it doesn't happen. There's some nuance in this, and there's as it relates to the complexity of the human condition.
What I found interesting when I looked at your stats is the data about kids in middle school who were most commonly suspended for physical assaults. And then the majority of students suspended over the last 6 years were also self-declared Indigenous students. Yet Indigenous students only represent about 30% of the students in the Winnipeg division. What accounts for that overrepresentation in the stats? Just to ask that question.
Yeah, well, and this is my inquiry. Part of what I say to all the folks in Winnipeg School Division is, we're all about noticing and wondering, like, why is that? So when I look at our suspension data, I look at grade 6. Okay, not a lot of kids are getting suspended, but all of a sudden in grade 7 it doubles. So what happened in the summer between grade 6 and 7? And I say this sort of jokingly, but what happens between early years and middle years? And it may not be the child. It may be the actual structures and barriers and systems in school where kids are starting to say, and it's also child development. There's something happening to the early adolescent brain at that point. But these are the conversations we need. We need to rip the Band-Aid off of this to sort of say, whoa, in early years, when there was one teacher, when it was really, really sticky and rich, and family and community based, we didn't see a lot of suspensions, but all of a sudden, as it relates, and we have some 7 to 12 schools, when we put them in a bigger building, kids are communicating something to us. So how do we address that? And I would say the other big noticing, and to your point about most of the children that we are suspending are Indigenous. And First Nations, and here's a mirror image of our system of incarceration. And so what we have to sort of say is, let's take a step back at that and look at how we decolonize our schools. Our schools are hyper colonial. And so how is, in the TRC, particularly in the truth section as it relates to education, says there's 4 things that we need to bring into schools if we're going to answer the calls to action. That's language, that's land, that's culture, and community. And so if we're really serious about allowing First Nations and Indigenous learners to feel that they're the coolest kids in our schools, that they fully belong, we have to bring those 4 things in.
How are you doing that? Or are you at the stage where you have anything concrete you can share about how you're doing that and addressing that?
The first thing that I've done is I've, on my superintendent's team, we have a divisional cookum now, hiring more Indigenous principals, more Indigenous teachers, more Indigenous staff from community. We're revamping R.B. Russell a little bit to be a community college so that we can train people from community to be EAs, to be teachers, to be ECE workers, so that families who traditionally have been told that school is not for them can now say, hey, I'm going to claim that school as my own. Part of this is a generational piece, but I think we have to completely reimagine the public school system from an Indigenous perspective.
Can you walk us through what happens when there is a violent act at school, whether it's a student assaulting another student or a student assaulting a teacher? Like, how are kids and staff who witness or hear about violent events even reassured that they're going to be kept safe? Like, what actually happens in those moments?
There are processes, but it really starts with the principal as the school leader, as a pedagogical leader. We always want to bring the temperature down. You want to separate kids immediately, and we're really reticent to bring in police. But we also want to make a clear plan, not only for those impacted, so the families of the kids who may have been impacted and the teachers, but we need to make a clear plan about how we have someone re-enter the community in a really mindful way.
Do you think that teachers now, to speak to educators, are concerned that about aggression in school right now? Is that a concern that you have? Some kids are bringing more aggression into schools. Is that an issue?
Well, I think what we're finding just in Winnipeg in general, that there's sort of a heightened sense of desperation. And Winnipeg School Division, amongst other systems, is keeping the city together. So we are seeing more families in dire straits. And we're seeing families who simply can't even walk into the door of Safeway. We're seeing homelessness. We're seeing abject poverty. We're seeing trauma. And that will often sort of render itself in kids acting out. But behavior is communication. We have to react to that communication. What did they witness before they came to school? What hadn't they eaten that morning? And so those are the things that we have to take into context while balancing people's legitimate anxieties about safety. We have 5,000 staff. And I'm putting the responsibility on staff to sort of say, you need to know your kids deeply. And when there are heavy-duty things that are happening, to sort of look at things systemically, unpack the barriers and the structures and the policies that we have that might actually be causing a lot of these events. But then how is it that we educate ourselves that when students doing things that they shouldn't in violent ways, that we can bring them down, that we can make them feel part of community, but that also that they know they have the responsibility to make reparations.
Thank you very much for being part of our series. Really valuable.
Thank you.
Matt Henderson is superintendent of the Winnipeg School Division. We had a lengthy conversation last week, and that was part of what you heard this morning. Now, we're going to continue our series on Thursday, specifically looking at youth violence and where we go from here, with a youth mental health specialist explaining what's happening in a kid's brain development that can lead to violence. And on Friday, how one special kind of information
Wrap between Ottawa and Ontario over international students. Mark Friesen says the federal cap on foreign student permits is a concern for Manitoba. He says the number of international students at ACC has exploded in the last decade. And a woman in Point Douglas says it's the neighbors suffering from a bureaucratic nightmare preventing the demolition of the burned-out Vulcan Ironworks site. Catherine Flynn says the entire community is in danger from asbestos and repeated fires. We'll hear more in our next local news at 8:30.
All right. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
In the forecast, -11 in Winnipeg. We've had that light trace amount of snow. It makes it look foggy out the window. And that's what we've got right now. So -11 now, -4 is the daytime high. 30% chance that we'll have that light snow continuing with us. The issue today is going to be the wind in the weather. So winds south 30 to 50 this morning. In the traffic situation on the commute, not too bad out there. 788-3093 if you want to update Corey. Coming up after 8 o'clock on the show, Ottawa is planning to cap the number of new international student visas to Canada. How do some university students feel about that? International students here at our universities. Jim Agapito was out yesterday talking with students. We're going to hear what they had to say. In addition, just to highlight, if you want to read more about the story, Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew has weighed in yesterday as well. He said he's still waiting to hear from Ottawa on the matter about what this will mean for numbers in Manitoba. He says, quote, of course we need to be able to house and have the right programs and ensure quality education for those folks coming to Manitoba. But if there is a large reduction in the cap here, potentially, he says, quote, it's going to put an upward pressure on tuition here, end quote. So lots at stake with what the feds announced. We'll get into it after 8. Stay with us.
On Cue with Tom Power.
The director Ava DuVernay has made a career out of telling these profound stories with a strong social conscience. Maybe you've seen her films like Selma or 13th. Ava will tell you about her latest film, Origin, and what drew her to a book that was called Unadaptable.
I write answers.
That's coming up on Cue, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
The CBC News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current with Matt Galloway.
Rachel Notley led the Alberta NDP to election victory in 2015, ending a 4-decade Conservative reign. Now, as she steps down as that party's leader, Rachel Notley looks at where she's leaving her party and her province. That's coming up on The Current.
This is World Report. Good morning from CBC News. I'm Marcia Young. Voters in New Hampshire are heading to the polls. Today marks the first of the presidential primaries leading up to the November election. The small town of Dixville Notch began voting at around midnight. All 6 votes cast there went to Nikki Haley. The former South Carolina governor is now Donald Trump's only competition in the race for the Republican nomination. The CBC's Richard Madden joins me now from Washington. And Richard, there is an early but small lead for Nikki Haley going into today's primaries. What are we expecting as the rest of the state heads to the polls?
Yeah, I think we can expect a strong push by both the Haley and Trump campaigns to basically get out the vote. Turnout's the ballgame, and Nikki Haley is hoping for a surprise upset against the former president, who, according to polls, maintains a solid lead in New Hampshire. So she's banking on a coalition of anti-Trumpers, moderates, and independents, or undeclared voters as they're called there, to show up in big numbers. Last night, she made her closing pitch to voters, sharpening her attacks against Trump's age, his political baggage, and the mood for change.
This really is an option. Do you want more of the same? Or do you want to go forward? Are we really going to say that we're okay with having our options be two 80-year-olds that run for president?
So the battle line's drawn. On the other hand, Trump is hoping for a blowout, which would basically signal to the party he's pretty much wrapped up the nomination. At a rally last night, he was joined on stage by some of his former competitors turned supporters, images he hopes will send a message for Republicans to coalesce behind him.
If Trump wins tonight, is that the end of the GOP race?
Yeah, I think so, because a win by Trump in New Hampshire would make it almost inevitable he will win the party's presidential nomination, setting up a 2020 rematch against President Joe Biden. So really, this is a make-or-break moment for Haley and the anti-Trump resistance within the Republican Party. Now, Trump wants to steamroll over his detractors, and a win tonight would send a strong signal to them. Now, there's an old saying in America's election season that Iowa picks corn, New Hampshire picks presidents, and Trump could essentially bring the race to a finish with a strong showing tonight.
All right. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
This CBC's Richard Madden in Washington. Proceedings in Trump's defamation trial are again postponed today. He's expected to testify in the civil case involving E. Jean Carroll. Because of illness, the trial will resume tomorrow. The jury in this case will determine what Trump owes Carroll in damages related to defamatory statements he made about her sex assault allegations. Israel's military says its troops have encircled Khan Yunis. It says the city is a Hamas stronghold, but Palestinian Red Crescent says Israeli drones are shooting at anyone who moves near the Al-Amal hospital. The IDF says its troops are engaged in targeted combat, and it has been a fierce 24 hours of fighting.
במהלך הלחימה במרכז רצועת עזה
IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari says 21 soldiers have been killed in a single incident. That is the largest single loss of life for the Israeli military since the war began. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says at least 195 Palestinians have been killed in that same time frame. It says most of the casualties have been women and children. Officials are investigating a crash in northern BC. It involved a heli-skiing chopper not far from the community of Terrace. 3 people are confirmed dead. 4 are in hospital with critical injuries. As Tanya Fletcher reports, getting to the victims and getting them to safety required a complex rescue mission.
The helicopter crashed north of Terrace around 4 o'clock Monday afternoon. 3 air ambulances were dispatched along with 5 others on the ground. They were waiting along a nearby highway to take the victims to the hospital in Terrace. It went into code orange to make sure enough staff and resources would be available to treat multiple patients. David Jeffson with Terrace Search and Rescue says their team helped coordinate the response and were told 7 people needed to be brought to safety.
Precautions were all in place to make sure that ambulances were there. And precautions were also in place for Mills Memorial to be on standby for possible multiple subjects.
The ski helicopter was operated by Northern Escape Heli-Skiing. In a statement, the president says, "We are focused on the safety of guests, staff, and guides. It's our top priority and the most important work we do." It goes on to say, "We are working closely with the RCMP and other authorities to support the investigation into the cause of the incident." It's unclear whether any signals were sent out before the helicopter crashed. The Joint Rescue Coordination Center confirms it sent a Cormorant search helicopter from Comox to assist with the rescue. Northern Escape's website says it was founded in 2004 by a group of friends, their experience in the heli-skiing industry going back to the 1980s. The company now says it has contacted a critical incident stress management team to support those affected by the crash. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
The man convicted of murdering 4 members of the Afzal family will be back in a London, Ontario courtroom today. A judge will consider whether he committed terrorism. He targeted a Muslim family with his truck in June of 2021. As Thomas Daigle reports, today's sentencing hearing will focus on the killer's motivation.
I pray that it is
labeled as terrorism, it will set a precedent.
Community members have insisted for more than 2.5 years the attacker is a terrorist, targeting the Afzals in his deadly truck attack because of their Muslim faith. Isa Islam is a cousin of the youngest victims. He says the terrorism label would help break a dangerous cycle.
Nathaniel Veltman was inspired by the New Zealand Islamophobic attacker, who was inspired by the Quebec mosque shooter before him.
Veltman was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Prosecutors now intend to prove to the judge the avowed white nationalist wanted to strike fear in all Muslims. By definition, terrorism is an act meant to intimidate a segment of the population. But Veltman's lawyer, Christopher Hicks, is arguing the attacker didn't meet that threshold.
His mental state was such that he didn't form the intention to intimidate the public, which is an aspect of the terrorism.
There's no clearer case of terrorism, I think, than this.
Extremism researcher Barbara Perry at Ontario Tech University is watching to see what the judge will decide.
One would hope that we wouldn't have more cases like this, but undoubtedly we will in the current climate. So it's going to be really important to, I think, more fully define what the standard is.
Veltman is guaranteed a life sentence, but today's arguments could influence his chances for parole after 25 years. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
In Montreal, an environmental group is trying to halt construction on the Northvolt electric vehicle battery plant. It is a multi-billion-dollar project, one the Prime Minister says could be transformative for Quebec. But the group says construction could harm wetlands, and it has filed an injunction request. That hearing has just been postponed until tomorrow. The federal Liberal cabinet continues its retreat in Montreal, and the NDP is in Edmonton this week. They're getting ready for the next parliamentary sitting. That begins next week. As David Thurton tells us, the party is strategizing new ways the Democrats can take on the Conservatives.
I was able to take down a Conservative stronghold here in Edmonton-Griesbach.
The NDP's Blake Desjardins saying the meeting in Alberta this week is a chance for the party to connect with its prairie roots and to remind itself and Canadians it's up to the task to take on the Tories.
It's no secret that Edmonton, I think, has been underrepresented. The last election had 34 Conservatives, and what we've seen was very little engagement federally, whether it was our MPs or whether it was policies, but I wanted to turn that around, and I think part of inviting our caucus here will help do that.
Aside from election strategy, they're also focused on the supply and confidence agreement between the NDP and the Liberals. Anne McGrath is the NDP's former national director. She's now taking on a new role overseeing progress on the party's deal with the Liberals.
There's a lot in that agreement that needs some attention.
Things Democrats hope to deliver on are ironing out the details of the pharmacare program and moving other key pieces of Labour legislation through Parliament. David Thurton, CBC News, Ottawa.
The nominees for the Oscars have been announced in Los Angeles.
The nominees for Best Motion Picture of the Year are
American Fiction.
Ooh. No surprise that Oppenheimer, Barbie, and Killers of the Flower Moon also leading the pack. The nominations were announced by Zazie Beetz and Jack Quaid. Oppenheimer, 13 nominations in total. Barbie is not far behind with 8 nods, including Best Supporting Actor for Canadian Ryan Gosling. The 96th Annual Academy Awards will be hosted by Jimmy Kimmel. The show is in LA on March 10th. All right, put that in your calendar. That is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm Marcia Young.
Gosling is Ken in my head. He was so funny. Good morning, everyone. It is 8:10 a.m. on 89.3 FM, 990 AM or on the app. This is Information Radio. I'm Marcy Marcusa. You're on CBC, and thanks for spending some time with us this morning. In a moment, your forecast. We are taking that turn to more mild conditions today for sure. So stay tuned. Abby will tell you all about it. Also, this half hour in the program, we're going to hear from students. Yesterday, right at this time, the developing story was Ottawa coming out with confirmation that they are planning to cap the number of new international student visas in Canada. We're going to hear this half hour how some university students feel about this. We are also going to read part of an email, and we got a call earlier on this very same topic from some people in our community that are concerned about the way the federal government, and by extension the media, has been framing the conversation. Stay tuned. Right now, let's go to Heather Wells for headlines.
Good morning. Well, more First Nations groups are cutting ties with the downtown Winnipeg hotel following the alleged treatment of a woman there. Video on social media showing a woman restrained with zip ties in the lobby of the Marlborough Hotel. Manitoba, Kuwaitnawi, Okimakanak, the Northern Chiefs, has informed its members they have the right to leave there if they're staying there. And the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs says most of the people it had staying there have been moved to other hotels. The Winnipeg School Division says it's taking action to change the overrepresentation of Indigenous students in its suspension numbers. Data from the city's largest school division show the majority of students suspended in the last 6 years self-identified as Indigenous. We'll hear more in our next local news at 8:30.
Thank you, Heather Wells.
You're welcome.
Abby Adiyemi.
Good morning once again. As we approach rush hour, the temperature is now at minus 10 degrees in Winnipeg and mainly cloudy. For the remainder of the day, those mainly cloudy skies will be hanging out with us with a 30% chance of snow, and the wind will be coming from the south. The high for today is still expected to be around minus 4 degrees. Now, as the night unfolds, clouds will be hanging out in the skies with that light chance of snow coming our way, but there's a risk of frost, freezing drizzle later tonight, plus the winds, and then we'll see around minus 3 in the morning. Turning our gaze to tomorrow morning, it's going to be mainly cloudy. The south winds will continue, and then it's going to become light when the morning period starts. And we're looking at a high of minus 1 tomorrow. So we are really, really warming up, Mercy.
So strange.
I know, we're warming up, but the wind is still there.
Yeah,
let's not forget that.
For sure.
So it's still going to be kind of cold.
It's just so interesting. I mean, if you look way off, we could hit 0 here. I know it's happened before in January, but every January when it happens, it's like, what? Maybe not for this extended of a period of time.
Yeah,
so.
because I see 0 on Monday.
Yeah, I
so
know.
I'm like, oh, okay.
We'll see. Thanks, Abby.
You're welcome.
Corey, just off the phone again?
No, actually, was on the phone with a future
not
guest.
a traffic.
Yeah, not a traffic.
Not a traffic
Lots of other
issue.
people calling. But a couple of things to maybe look out for. Got a call earlier from Samina. Southbound Cordon at Waverly. There's a barricade preventing you from turning on to Waverly, as well as blocking that sidewalk. So look out for that. May still also be a stalled bus westbound William at Sherbrooke. That was about an hour ago. Hopefully it's cleared, but if it's not, heads up, keep left to get around that. Heard from Julie earlier as well. But if you see anything else going on out there on the road, sidewalks, highways, bike lanes, give me a call and I'll let folks know what you're seeing. That number to call, 204-788-3093.
Well, up first, the federal government announced the 2-year cap on new international undergraduate student visas yesterday, and a lot of analysis moving forward and a lot of questions we still have not yet answered. What we do know is Ottawa will cut the number of visas by 35% this year. Here is Immigration Minister Mark Miller. We're having a challenge finding the clip, so we're just going to take a moment because we want to hear what the minister has to say. So we'll take that moment by turning our attention to the various ways that you can reach us at 788-3205 or radio 893 at cbc.ca. And I'm encouraging you to reach out to us on this story, but on any story as well that you hear on the program. After actually we do hear this item, we'll get to the email, because since this was announced initially yesterday, a lot of you have been writing to us and calling us with some concerns about this. So once again, here's Immigration Minister Mark Miller talking about what they're doing.
These measures are not against individual international students. They are to ensure that as future students arrive in Canada, they receive the quality of education that they signed up for and the hope that they were provided in their home countries. It would be a disservice to welcome international students in Canada knowing not all of them are getting the resources they need to succeed in Canada, and having them return home disillusioned and disappointed in Canada's education system.
That is Federal Immigration Minister Mark Miller. Now, in addition to what was announced yesterday, they also announced that spouses of undergraduate students will be unable to apply for work permits while their partners attend school. So we wanted to hear from international students naturally. CBC's Jim Agapito spent some time yesterday at the University of Manitoba.
My name is Tafazo Keith Mbiwa. I kind of feel kind of two-sided about it because where I'm from, we don't have the opportunities we have here in Canada. But at the same time, if it's to change housing costs, which are already very high, I feel like it's 50-50 for me, but I'm not sure. It's kind of discouraging considering the fact that some children out there are very smart and they could be doing very well here, but they won't get that opportunity because they're not here and they can't come here.
How do you think this decision will, affect people, even people here right now and their futures of wanting to study here?
I feel like, yes, it might actually be an issue where you are here already and you get sent back or something like that because they don't have housing like they're claiming.
And what have you been seeing in terms of housing here? Like how difficult, and to say it's a shortage, that's why they're doing it. What have you seen?
Yeah, there is a shortage because I've been trying to actually apply for some, and also the pricing is very expensive compared to back home, and it's also very discouraging even looking through it.
If you were studying here, you could bring your spouse over and they could get a work permit to work while you went to school. That's no longer going to be the case. How do you feel that will also affect people?
I feel like that's going to be ruining marriages all around and stuff, and it's very discouraging, I won't lie. I think people are going to be affected by that, and there's probably going to be demonstrations because of that. Again, that's very discouraging because they should make up their mind what exactly they're trying to do, if they're trying to increase the population of Canada or not, because a lot of people know back home, people know Canada is a place that anyone can come as long as you're qualified. And now that's going to change drastically, and people's career paths are going to change because of these decisions that they're making. They should also be considerate of other people.
Eniola Adeleye. I think it's extremely unfair to international students. They're looking to get a better education and they're just profiting off of their expenses. We know that Canada as a whole is built on immigration students. It's built on immigration as a whole. I think that they're going to lose a lot of revenue. A lot of people are not going to want to come here. And it's just going to be very, very hectic. And I think that they're going to lose a lot more than what they're hoping to get out of it. Well, the truth is that housing everywhere is extremely expensive, and housing here for international students, they're usually living with a relative or renting out. I know many international students that there is 6 of them in a house, 5 or more. Housing is not a problem, and I think it's just a political scam that they're trying to get at to make it seem like, oh, it's for a good cause, when really it isn't. It's just so unlikely for them to have done this, considering that is the whole entire story, is we are for immigrants, we love immigration, and here you are trying to get rid of a lot of people that are trying to come into the country. And with the government's changing as well, if you're going to take away from a minority, you're likely just adding to the majority of it, and it's just not fair for a lot of people that are already struggling under poverty line. It's just not fair. A lot of international students that are coming here are not just young students. They're mothers, they're parents, and having to leave your family back home is a very, very hard thing to do. So I think in the nearest future, if they're going to keep this up, we're definitely going to see a decline in international people coming to Canada and migrating, and I think it's going to be extremely difficult for people to live their family there, knowing that when they get here, they might not be able to work, and it's just for school. They need an income.
Paulson Olamijula. No, this is sad. I was an international student. I know the pain that international students go through. I believe that if they can increase the number, it's going to be helpful because everybody is just struggling to just better their lives. I think probably because there's so many people, and probably because of that, it's driving up the prices of houses. So it's going to make it very bad. The laws should be a little bit fair, but who am I to discuss what is fair? If you bring international students here and you make their life miserable, I don't know how they're going to boost your economy because, yes, they are needed. If they're not needed, why are you bringing them here? Because they boost your economy. International students' fees is higher. So some people might come and they will leave. When the government makes their decision, they look at all these things, but eventually they might have to change the decision when they see that it's impacting people's lives.
My name is Harmeet Singh Chavla. I work at the Department of Plant Science here. When I read the article, it said they want to cap the number of students in certain provinces. And I think BC and Ontario was on the top of that list. They didn't say anything about Manitoba, but of course, I think if they cap the numbers in Manitoba, that would create an impact. We might lose some students who come here. Personally, don't feel that students contribute a lot to the housing crisis. I would rather argue that they kind of bring in a lot of money, and so they contribute to the economy, then they are on their work permit, they contribute towards the taxes. So personally, I don't agree with this notion that the students are at the heart of housing crisis. I think there are other reasons for that. This change, I don't think it's in Canada. I think it's worldwide. There's like a negative sentiments going against immigration. I think people have to realize that students actually bring a lot here. So they bring in money, they bring in cultural diversity, they also bring in a lot of different work experience. I don't know what's the reason behind that, but that's a trend worldwide, not only here in Canada.
CBC's Jim Agapito talking to students and faculty at the University of Manitoba about this announcement yesterday. Now, a spokesperson for Immigration Minister Mark Miller could not confirm or tell us how Manitoba will be specifically affected by this change. So how far will our numbers be capped down, or will, in fact, we see an increase? Because what they're doing is looking province to province to figure out what they're going to do to meet what they're changing. In an email, they said, quote, in the spirit of fairness, individual, provincial, and territorial caps have been established, weighted by population, which will result in much more significant decreases in provinces where the international student population has seen the most unsustainable growth. This response goes on to say, quote, further information on the allocation model will be provided following further engagement with provinces and territories, end quote. As I mentioned earlier in the show, our Premier here, Wab Kinew, says he has not yet had clarity from the feds about what this will mean for Manitoba. But one of the things about how this conversation and announcement has been framed is causing concern for some people. And you've been listening and you've been writing in, and you have raised those concerns with us here at CBC. Part of it is how the feds have framed this and also how we're reporting on it. Because they have said it's a measure to limit international student permits in response to the housing crunch. That's how they framed this. We aired a call earlier with someone who raised concerns about this. You heard some of the concern with the students and the U of M faculty there. But I want to read part of an email that came in from Martin this morning. Martin Itzkow wrote and said, I agree with your caller this morning about the federal policy about international students and its linking to social problems of housing, etc. Many of those social problems were here for many years, and there are other areas that need change. We at the Coalition of Cultural Communities for Families, that's who Martin works with locally, says we're very concerned about the lens and need to reframe this conversation to the contribution of immigrants and how their communities have been solution finders in the city. In our cities. Please remember, Martin goes on to write that the percentage of immigrants, refugees, international students, permit holders in our province has increased as our population has grown. So they have and will continue to change all of our lives for the better. So Martin weighing in with his concerns and how he would like to see this conversation reframed. If you're listening to all of this and you want to weigh in, as I mentioned earlier, 788-3205, or you can email radio893@cbc.ca.
Hi, I'm Paul Havershrud, host of The Cost of Living, a national business show that looks at everything the world of money touches, which, admittedly, is a lot of stuff.
The Cost of Living. Go beyond the facts and figures and discover the compelling business stories that affect the day-to-day lives of Canadians right across the country. Economics, business, and you. The Cost of Living with host Paul Havershrud. Available now on CBC Listen.
8:24 a.m. is the time. -10 is the temperature in Winnipeg. Well, we were just hearing about the Oscar nominations coming out this morning. Let's talk about a film that recently has been playing here in Winnipeg. You might have caught it at Cinematheque over the holidays. I know it was on in December. It's called The Iron Claw, and it tells quite a tragic story of the Van Erich wrestling family. Alongside stars like Zac Efron and Jeremy Allen White, the movie also features new music from some Canadians. So that's where we're going by talking about it this morning. Richard Reed Perry and the Barr Brothers are featured in the track for this. They collaborated with American vocalist Little Scream on this tune. It's called Live That Way Forever. Bum, 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 bum. To a movie. You can hear that tune in the new movie, The Iron Claw. And I know it was recently playing at Cinematheque here in Winnipeg about a wrestling family. It's supposed to be quite a tragic watch, but a good film. It is right now coming up to news time at 8:30. Well, you've heard of buildings earning historic designations in our community. But if a Winnipeg City Councillor finds support for his idea, then some trees will get it too. Today on Up to Speed this afternoon, you'll hear from St. Boniface Councillor Matt Allard about his hopes for some cottonwood groves in his ward. So that's coming up a little bit later today in local programming. Right now, though, it's time for local news from your CBC Winnipeg newsroom.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 8:30, it is -10, and we are warming up. It's going to get messy out there. A high today of -4. It's going to be windy as well. More First Nations groups are cutting ties with a downtown Winnipeg hotel following the alleged treatment of a woman there. Video on social media, as we told you yesterday, shows a woman restrained with zip ties in the lobby of the Marlborough Hotel. Manitoba, Kuwait-Naui, Okemakanak, the Northern Chiefs group, has informed its members they have the right to leave if they're currently staying at the Marlborough. The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs says most of the people it had staying at the hotel have been moved to other hotels. Grand Chief Kathy Merrick says the video raises serious concerns.
For the management of the hotel and for the workers in the hotel to have that abuse of power. And so that does not sit well with any leader in terms of how this young lady was being treated. So if she's being treated like that, are they treating our other people like that?
Merrick wants hotel staff to receive sensitivity training, and she'd like to see more First Nations people trained as guards. She also says it's time to offer First Nations people more health care services in their own communities. The head of Assiniboine Community College in Brandon says the federal cap on international student permits could be a problem for Manitoba. Mark Frieson says the number of international students at ACC has exploded in the last decades to more than 20% of the college's total population.
If the result of the cap or the rules result in fewer students or more delays, that won't be positive in terms of both the population goals that we might have here, as well as any resulting financial implications of there being fewer students.
Frieson says Ottawa should open up visas and permits for apprenticeship programs. He says those foreign students could help fill workforce gaps in Canada for things like building housing. The head of Winnipeg's largest school division says students should be suspended only as a last resort. The Winnipeg School Division, which has nearly 30,000 students, reports 743 suspensions in the 2022-23 school year. Superintendent Matt Henderson says more families are experiencing poverty, homelessness, and trauma, and that can be reflected in students' behavior.
What did they witness before they came to school? What hadn't they eaten that morning? And so those are the things that we have to take into context while balancing people's legitimate, anxieties about safety.
The division's data indicates middle school students are most commonly suspended for physical assaults. Henderson says officials need to have a conversation about why rates of violence go up in the middle school years. A Point Douglas woman is fed up with the bureaucracy delaying demolition of what's left of the old Vulcan Ironworks site. The owner says he can't go ahead because the city and province are giving him conflicting orders. The city tells him to demolish the buildings. The province says the demolition must be done with water because there's asbestos in the old pipes. But it's too cold. Catherine Flynn says the neighbors are suffering.
They've got to find some way to get, right and left hands talking and cooperating, because while they're diddling around, you're putting an entire community in danger. So asbestos particles are blowing around a residential neighborhood, and that's okay, but we can't put construction people in danger to do the cleanup where they might possibly have the right safety equipment.
Flynn says government must streamline the process. An appeal by Vulcan's owners will be heard by the city next month. Well, the nominations are out. Just announced this past hour, Oppenheimer leads all Oscar nominees with 13, including Best Film, Best Director for Christopher Nolan, and acting nominations for Emily Blunt, Robert Downey Jr., and Cillian Murphy. Barbie is also nominated for Best Film, including Best Supporting Actor for Canadian Ryan Gosling. The 96th Academy Awards are going to be hosted by Jimmy Kimmel, and the show's in Los Angeles on March 10th. You can find more news updated throughout the day. All you have to do is head to cbc.ca/Manitoba. You can also check out the CBC News app.
It's interesting because I was just looking at the list and Barbie's up for costuming, and in that movie they show the iconic outfits that went on Barbies over the years.
Yes.
And my sister and I were just howling in the theater. We have those pants. We have that jacket. Yeah. I bet lots of people.
I love Weird Barbie because I only had one Barbie in my whole life, and she ended up looking like Weird Barbie.
Yeah, marker on the face, hair cut off.
Yeah.
Yeah, walking around with a limp through the Barbie camper, because you chopped her leg off or something, or you twisted around her torso. You know, kids are hard on Barbies, but honestly, my Barbies always got their injuries doing heroic things as women.
Oh, that's great.
Like jumping off the couch or being thrown off some height of a roof or something.
They're fearless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I actually enjoyed that movie more than I thought I would. So
it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Check it out if you want. The Oscar nods, that is. There are some Canadian connections. You can read that at cbc.ca. Abby?
We're warming up all the way to -4 this morning, but currently we are at -10 degrees. Brandon will be seeing -6 later tonight. Thompson cloudy, 60% chance of light, snow high -14. Cloudy in Gimli, -12. Brandon, -12. -8 in Steinbach, and -9 in Morris.
Thank you, Abby Adiyemi.
You're welcome.
Corey, anything to say about the commute?
Yeah, northbound Keniston, just between Grant and Taylor, got a call from Rui that in the curb lane, there's a semi-truck blocking that with its four ways on. So people have to get around that, causing some pretty big delays for folks. Thanks to everyone who called this morning. We'll be back to take some more tomorrow.
All right. Thanks, Corey Funk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abby Adiyemi. Thank you to Heather Wells, Megan Ketcherson, and Joni Nicolo, as well as Brad Lillies, all on our live team this morning. And big thanks to our APs in unit, our associate producers, who work so hard day in, day out, as well as our leaders in unit, Nellie Gonzalez and Leif Larson. The Current is coming up next with Matt Galloway. Stay tuned. Right here on 89.3. We'll talk to you again live tomorrow morning.